You're live.
Oh, it starts here?
No, I'm not getting close to those stairs yet. We're moving in.
Okay, so while planning board is getting settled, I'm going to call a select board meeting to order at 6:31 on April the 10th, 2023. Hello, everybody. So we're all here. So Mimi, when you're ready.
Maybe Jesse's on Zoom. I'm sorry, he's in the.
Dorian, do you have a quorum?
Yeah, I should call them.
You got a quorum?
We will have a quorum, we should have a quorum, but they're not here right now. 1, 2, 3. So Jesse here?
I call the planning board meeting in session. We have Ms. Houlihan, Ms. DeMaria, and myself here, and Mr. Stein on Zoom.
You've got a quorum? Okay, go ahead.
Gonna call, meeting to order for the Southborough
You may want to come up here, Dorian, so 6:32.
9:32. Is it over?
Okay. Okay, Dorian, come up to the microphone and do it again so she can hear you. It didn't get recorded.
I'll give the time correct this time.
Take two.
Going to call a meeting to order for the Southborough Housing Opportunity Partnership Committee at 6:32 PM.
Thank you. So welcome, everyone. Andrew, you've got a quorum? Well, I don't know who you've got on Zoom.
Marcy.
I don't think we will.
Okay. All right, you'll watch and let us know?
Yeah, I will. Yeah.
Chelsea will watch, okay, all right. Okay, so we're going to start off with the select board, normal public comment. So public comment is for agenda item, or for non-agenda items. They are limited to 3 minutes in length. Is there anyone here for the opening public comment? No?
No.
Okay, all right. Okay, so moving on. Okay, so our first agenda item is a joint meeting with Planning Board, Advisory, and CHOPSI to talk about something that's really, really, really important. So Mimi, I was going to start out with a brief intro. Colleen has read it to make sure I'm factually correct as far as what I want to say. And then I'll turn it over to you to amplify, talk about what you want to talk about so that we can figure out where we're going with this. Okay, okay with you? Sure. Okay. All right, so we're all meeting tonight to discuss the plan to comply with the MBTA Communities Zoning Law, Chapter 40A, Section 3A, to make sure we are all on the same page. It would probably be helpful for some of us in the listening public to refresh everyone's memories as to what this law is all about. The law was enacted in January 2021 to address the Commonwealth's acute need for housing by facilitating the development of transit-oriented multifamily housing. The law directly responds to the housing shortage by implementing zoning reforms that require MBTA communities to permit reasonable levels of multifamily housing development near transit stations. There are approximately 175 communities in Massachusetts that are covered by this law. In essence, we are required to develop either new zoning districts that would allow the creation of multifamily housing by right. The law requires that the new district or districts consist of at least 50 total acres. Originally, those 50 acres had to be located within a half mile of the Southborough commuter rail station. Given where the commuter rail station is located in Southborough, that would have been quite challenging to say the least. Last March, Don Morris and Lisa Braccio wrote a well-written letter to the state and requested relief from the half-mile requirement. That relief was granted. Southborough still has to rezone the 50 acres, but only 10 has to be within 1/2 mile of the commuter rail station. The other 40 can be located where we decide. The timing for compliance with the creation of the new district, in our case, is 12/31/24. Any changes to zoning bylaws need to be first promulgated by the planning board through the public hearings requirement, and then passed by town meeting. Normally, zoning bylaw changes require a 2/3 supermajority vote at town meeting. In the instant case, it is believed that this town meeting vote will only require a majority vote. More on that in a minute. In addition to requiring a new multifamily zoning district or districts totaling at least 50 acres, the districts have to allow a density of at least 15 units per acre. Simple math means that 750 units could be built in the new district. Southborough currently has approximately 3,600 residential units. The 750 potential units would represent a more than 20% increase in residential units in a potential short time frame. This is on top of the potential for a 40B project in Park Central, which is slated for 200 units. The MBTA community's new district cannot have any age restriction and must be built with units suitable for children. The act does allow the new district to require up to 10% be built with affordable housing. If an MBTA community fails to comply with this new zoning requirement, the act imposes certain financial penalties, mainly access to certain grants. The grants that would not be available are not ones that we regularly access. Vanessa and Colleen put together a schedule, which you should all have received, that indicates that we've only received one of the grants in the past few years, totaling $45,000. There was some discussion about considering opting out of the Act's requirements due to the inconsequential financial penalties. However, recently, the current Massachusetts Attorney General has stated that she will sue any community civilly that does not comply. More on that one also shortly. So we are all meeting together tonight to make sure we have a cohesive plan to work together. The addition of up to 750 units on top of the proposed Park Central 40B is, simply put, enormously significant. The Planning Board is tasked with developing the required bylaw changes. Based on the timing of our annual town meetings, the Planning Board would need to have its work completed for the March 2024 town meeting, by the March 2024 town meeting, unless we decide to postpone the zoning article to a fall 2024 town meeting, which would be pretty late. Given the extensive interest the zoning bylaw will engender, the Planning Board will need to allow for substantial time to have their proposed bylaw discussed and vetted by others, including the Select Board, Advisory, and SHOPC, to name three, and of course the general public, including affected neighborhoods. The zoning bylaw changes have been difficult to deal with in the recent past, and this one will probably be no exception. So the purpose of tonight's joint meeting is to allow all members of these committees to express their opinion and end up with an agreed tentative path forward. It is likely that there will be law changes, et cetera, that will affect us as we move forward. I also want to remind the group that we are currently considered either closing one of our 4 K-8 schools and or significantly rehabbing Neary in connection with the Massachusetts Society of Building Administration. We recently agreed with the MSBA what the school population of K-8 would be used in our joint process. We signed that letter on the morning of town meeting. The number of students projected over the next few years does not include any increase from either the Park Central 40B nor the increase in housing due to the zoning changes required by the MBTA Communities Act. And if you just do the math, it could be significant. We've got about 1,100 kids in K-8, so take 750 and take 200, and you can see why this is really, really crucial that we think through this. The parcel of land that has been most discussed to be used for the 40 acres so far by the Planning Board is 40 acres on land owned by Dell EMC. Currently, Dell EMC is marketing their entire Southborough parcel for sale and is in the middle of evaluating offers that they have received. There is keen interest in the vacant land owned by Dell by developers wishing to take advantage of the new zoning required by the MBTA Communities Act. Therefore, Dell EMC is very interested in our meeting tonight and the information and or guidance they might glean from it. So I've spoken with Town Council, Mr. Tallerman, about certain aspects of compliance that have come my way as far as questions, and I'll share those as we start talking where they're relevant. Ms. Luttrell will now provide an overview from her seat as Planning Board Chair.
Thank you, Kathy. I think you pretty much covered it. If you want to start talking about specifics and districts or...
Yep. And I did that, Mimi, not for the Planning Board's benefit. You guys know this stuff cold, but for Select Board, for Advisory, for even SHOPC, and for whoever's listening, to just kind of refresh where we are and how important this is to this entire town. So Colleen looked at it, she said that I had the facts right, so I wanted to make sure that that was okay. So I think maybe we jump right into talking about what you guys, where you think this is going to go as far as the district.
So as you said, 10 acres needs to be within a half mile of the train station, and as everyone realizes, that's an area where our more affordable housing is in Southborough, and a lot of our older housing stock is in Southborough. And it's much smaller lots, so the developability of that area is not very good, but the state just wants the zoning put in place. There's no, you don't have to build anything. But the issue would be getting that to pass through town meeting. Zoning's very, very difficult, especially when it affects neighborhoods. So the planning board was, the reason why those Dell properties came up as the other 40 is because they don't abut any residential neighborhoods. And as we know from Madison Place, which was a 40B, that went through without any opposition because it doesn't abut any residential neighborhoods. So we're thinking if the state really wants those 750 units more than just a zone that may never be built, I'm wondering if we could just give them the 47 acres there and be done with it. But that would take some discussion with DCHD to see if they would go along with that. But that's kind of where we're at. Anyone else on the board want to add to that?
So what?
Hey, Mimi,
Sorry.
it's Jesse. Hey, I missed, sorry, I had to cut out because my son called from school, but did you, I apologize if you did touch on this. I could have sworn that we had to have 10 acres within a half mile of the T-stop.
That's correct.
Okay, because did you just say the 47 acres would be out by Dell?
Well, there is 47 in 3 lots there.
Okay. Okay, so the 47 out there does not preclude 10 near the T-stop.
Not as the guidance is written, but we're hearing that the state is, has some flexibility, and we would need to discuss with them if that would work with them and that would meet our compliance.
Okay, thanks.
That's without the 10 acres near the T station, right? The proposal would be do the 47 instead of the 10.
That's what I think the board would like to
Okay.
discuss with the state to see if they'd be willing to go along with that.
Good, thanks.
And that's zoned industrial?
Industrial park, so it would be, we're thinking it would be an overlay, so the underlying zoning would stay, and then the multifamily housing would be an overlay.
Of course.
So Mimi, we mentioned Madison Place. Do we know, or maybe Kathy, maybe you know, how many kids actually attend Southborough schools from Madison Place?
I don't have a number today, but the last time I asked, it was 17. And that's because Madison Place was mostly 1 and 2 bedrooms, and they added on their garden apartments, right? So mostly 1 and 2, doesn't have a pool, doesn't have a gym, doesn't allow pets. So it just didn't attract a whole lot of kids. So, you know, whatever gets built probably won't have those restrictions. So I don't know if you can basically take Madison Place and extrapolate to this new one, but it wasn't bad for, you know, 170 apartments. So that was 10%. So
Okay.
1 out of 10 had a kid.
Okay, and then just for any of the public that's listening, I think it's very important that as we talk about a potential overlay, and I think, Mimi, you kind of touched on this as well as Kathy, that just because there's an overlay there doesn't mean that's what's going to get built. It allows for the opportunity, if a developer so chooses, to completely build out a site in such a way. But I just don't want the public to be scared at the word overlay, thinking that that's automatically what's going to happen. It just could be. So, thank you.
So if we stay with the math, 47 would be 700 units that you could do there. So, you disagree?
No, no.
Okay. So let's separate the 10 from the 47 for a moment. So you basically take a half mile around the T station, right? And we haven't talked about South Union yet, right, as far as that maybe being part of this. Is that anything that you guys have talked about? No? So you find 10 acres, right? And you just add the zoning, and it's already developed, and so the hope is it just stays that way?
Well, we don't know. So if you zone something, you have to be prepared that it's going to be built and that homes will be raised and multifamily housing developments will go in their place.
So someone comes in and just makes an offer to the whole neighborhood to do, that's kind of the danger of that one, right?
Yeah, but I would think it would be less likely that that units would be built there because a developer getting, every single lot owner down there within, well, we have a little piece shown here that's within the business village, and there's a little bit of industrial there, is unlikely. But that's why I'm asking whether the state really wants the units or really wants just zoning done.
So you're asking the state that question?
Yes, but not right at this moment.
Okay.
Can I say one other thing, too?
Of course.
Sorry. So, Mimi, one of the things I think that we would have to take into account for the 10 acres near the train as well is, we've got resource areas there with the Sudbury River, so I think that would make it a little tougher as well, and most of those lots are half-acre lots as well. So going by the half-acre lot, say, and somebody buys a house and then wants to do something there, I think they're going to have a huge hurdle with the resource area as well as even being able to park for that many units. So, does that make sense? Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, you're right. Some of those are old Res C. They're even smaller than a
Yeah.
half acre.
Okay, thank you.
So to keep on the math for a second, so if you designated the 47 acres as the new district, 47 times 15 is 705, and then we add that to the 150 from the 10 acres, right? So you get 855 as the max that could be built. It's my understanding that planning board intends to go up to the max in the district as far as affordable, so the 10%, right? So you could get, again, if you built the max, 85 affordables out of this whole thing, which, as Dorianne knows very well, would put us over into safe harbor territory. So that's interesting, right? So another way to get there.
If something else doesn't get us there first.
That's right. That's right, that's right, that's right. Go ahead, Chelsea.
So could you require that this district have to be 10% affordable?
Yeah.
So you could, okay, so if you were to do that, then you would know that it'd be guaranteed there.
Yeah, it's, you can have a maximum of 10% affordable required.
So that's in the law, you can go up to, you don't
Okay.
have to, but you can go up to 10, and it's my understanding that they intend to go up to 10%, so I'm looking.
Go to 20 with the HCD.
Well, that's a complicated, the municipality has to prove that it would be economically viable in order to do the 20. So I think it's easier to say 10%.
Stick with the safe harbor. Okay, so let's introduce something that Mr. Pfaff brought up today. So Andrew, you want to talk about something that you think might be worth pursuing?
So I was mentioning to Kathy whether or not this is going to qualify as an unfunded mandate. So my suggestion would be that the select board send something to the state auditor and request that they review that. And if it is, then we have the option of either A, going to Superior Court and exempting Southborough, or filing a class action lawsuit to exempt the town, or the state has to provide the funding for the mandate, which by my math is about $10 million a year.
So one choice is to exempt us from the act itself, would be one resolution?
So Andrew, have you heard, I mean, a class action lawsuit is an interesting concept because a lot of towns along the MBTA route are not happy with what the requirement is. I mean, have you heard or have you read something that that's a consideration?
I looked at today about at least 5 or 6 towns just quickly that have called it an unfunded mandate. I don't believe any has yet petitioned the state auditor to determine that. But then once that determination comes through, the state either has to fund it, or, you know, the town has the ability to go to Superior Court and fight it, or 10 taxpayers have the ability to file a class action lawsuit and fight it. And that's for any mandate, right?
So that was one of the questions I asked Mr. Tellerman today after Andrew called. And remember, Jay's firm represents, what, 25 towns or so? So he says, yes, his clients are talking about this. So we're not the first to think about this being an unfunded mandate. So he definitely said it's something that we should think about. He recommends going forward because time is limited, right? Go forward. But he thinks things are going to happen, you know, that there's, you know, a lot of, it's so one-stop shopping for everybody, and that there's just going to be a lot of towns that this doesn't really work with that are going to try to do something about it. So there's more to come, he thinks, as far as resolution here. But just because you got a year, you got to keep going and be ready for this, right? So we got to keep going as if we got to do it, but there will be things that he thinks will happen that will change things, and that might be one of them.
Kathy, another question related to that is that I've always been interested in the possibility of opting out before our new Attorney General decided that that's going to generate a lawsuit. I got to believe, and there are towns that have opted out and are now in the crosshairs for that kind of lawsuit. I have to believe that there will be more towns who actually are interested in fighting back against that one, and that's another interesting question for town council, that, you know, are there groups that are going to pursue that angle to try to figure out a way to keep the opt-out option open?
So I asked that one too.
3 jumps ahead of me as usual.
So I've got some answers
What's the
here.
answer?
So he said, interesting, you know, it's a civil enforcement that she is talking about. I said, are we going to go to jail? And he said, no. It's civil, and he said there's really not a lot of precedent for this. He brought up a case in New Jersey called Laurel Valley. He said that's the only case where the federal government came in and told that town that they had to do something about their lack of affordable housing because it was so obvious. But he said she didn't have a lot of legs to stand on here as far as any precedent goes. So he doesn't know where she's going to get this from. So that's far from being decided too. So Andrew, I'll look at you. You're one of the attorneys in the bunch. But there's that too. So it's not so obvious that she's going to necessarily be able to do, especially if, you know, let's make up a number. What if 50 towns
Right.
opt out? You know, what are you going to say, 50 towns? And what the recourse would not be clear, and that's the problem. So, okay, what are you going to do then if you sue? What are you suing for?
Sounds uncivil to me, but go ahead.
Well, I was just gonna say, I think it makes sense to continue gathering information about those different options, but, you know, I understood the purpose of all the boards and committees getting together was to think of a common path to comply with the MBTA Communities Act, and this is really a discussion about how to not comply with it. So-
Well, I think it's both. We got to set a plan to make sure the planning board knows we're behind what they're doing, we're all working on the same page as far as what, they've got an intense amount of work to do to get this all teed up, right? And all the details worked out. So it's not just we're just talking about all the choices tonight, so we know, but his advice is to go forward, but, you know, things are going to happen along the way that may change this, but you can't wait for those things to happen before you do anything, because this is going to take a while before they really get to the point they think they know exactly what they want in this
Yep.
district, and they've had the hearings and got the feedback they need to get this done.
Kathy, I have a process question. I mean, I agree that we got to act like it's going to happen and figure out how we deal with it. Does the planning board have a timeline, a schedule at this point to say, by the end of, you know, X date, we got to have this in place, so that means you roll back. By next week, we have to have the bylaw drafted, or whatever crazy implication there may be there? I think that'd be very helpful for all the parties here to understand and try to figure out, are there bottlenecks that we need to anticipate and get in front of and not get surprised at the end? Because as everybody knows, there's a real crunch getting to town meeting on these things, and unexpected things happen. So let's try to build in whatever slack we can to give us some flexibility.
So I think that we'll start working on it right away. Colleen has gotten a couple of grants, so we're working with Bowler Engineering as one of our consultants. So the preliminary work has started, and if we're all on the same page, we'll know, what direction to push in.
It's sort of hard to know until we get more feedback from the state. In other words, if the Dell EMC property is a viable option, then that, I think, gives us a pretty clear path in that direction. If they say no to that, then it's not clear to me what Plan B is with other available parcels in town. So,
Well, Plan B would be to do the other district also, and that's the other question. If that goes to town meeting, so we're complying, we're bringing zoning to town meeting, and it fails, who are they going to sue?
I asked that question. I asked that
Sure.
question too, Mimi, so.
all of us. That's easy.
Jay says, unknown. What would happen if we do what we're supposed to do, we go to town meeting, and it fails, right? How can, what is she suing us for? We did everything we're supposed to, and town meeting said no. So he said that absolutely has not been adjudicated or determined, so, unknown. And remember the difference between the 10 acres and the 47. Dell wants to sell their property. They are actively marketing, and they've got a whole lot of response to their first set of bids, a lot of interest, and that interest was in large part, if you just call Crystal Pond, if you're heading south, east and west, right? So to the east of Crystal Pond, there is a lot of interest in that piece of it for this purpose. Developers, of course, know that we don't have a sewer system. They've got to build a wastewater treatment plant that costs a lot of money, so they've got to have a lot of density to make it work economically. So there's a whole lot of interest in that parcel. If we put the overlay or the new district there and putting the housing there, so they are all anxiously waiting to see what we do as far as this meeting and going forward.
Mimi, process question, kind of piggybacking on Sam. So as you work forward on this, as planning board works forward on this, do you have any insight? Would you be looking for potentially bringing something for the fall, or waiting until annual town meeting and actually seeing what may happen in between now and then?
Definitely not the fall. But the plan is in our action plan for annual town meeting, and then there's the fail-safe for the fall town meeting if it fails at annual.
Thank you.
I think that's a good plan to start at annual and then know you got a second bite at the apple if you need it as far as special. So is planning board ready to go as far as saying this is where we want to focus so that EMC Dell knows that the rest of it is not applicable as far as the overlay, or are you not that far along? I mean, we said tonight this is where you're focused, but you're still not sure at this point, correct?
Well, everything's draft.
Yes.
Just to ask a question, does anyone know what the acreage is at Park Central?
100?
Roughly 100.
Okay, so
It's
why
almost
don't
exactly
we-
100.
Well, as a backup to this, why don't we make that the district if we have to? If it's going to be developed, it's going to be developed, why don't we make that a district, consider making that the district, the overlay district?
Same issue as Park Central has in terms of traffic. What do you do with the
No
traffic?
secondary egress.
I
Build it.
understand, but if they're going to develop it,
Well,
they're not worried about that. We just have to make an overlay district somewhere where it could be built. It doesn't have to be built. They're not real strict about certain aspects of it. And if they're going, we can do the EMC property, that's great. But if we can't, why can't we make the overlay district part of that, the Park Central?
I mean, so that's a sort of a self-defeating thing. If the overlay district is someplace where it can't work for whatever reason, I got to believe that that would not be viewed favorably by the DHCD people, but who knows? Hard to
But if
predict.
he's going to develop Park Central, he's developing,
Yeah.
right? So if it gets developed and it's being considered, and there's blueprints and there's plans and there's all that other stuff, and I understand access is a problem, why can't we, if it's being developed, why can't we make it the overlay district? I'm just.
She's
throwing
got a
it out
good
there to
point here.
consider.
She's saying,
Yeah.
okay,
It's going to be developed.
forgetting whether.
200 plus 700 versus just
Right.
700.
Forgetting if you like Park Central or not. Let's say it goes forward. There's, again, only so much we can do with a 40B, right? Let's say if it goes forward, she said if it goes forward, then why not use that? for the overlay, instead of ending up with two huge developments on each side of Route 9 that could add literally 30% to the school population.
I'm
If you
not
just,
saying I'm for it, I'm just saying, doesn't
No, I
it
hear
make
you.
sense? It makes sense to make it the overlay district if we can't get something else. It's a nice backup. I'm not worried about access, that's not my problem. My problem is getting the overlay and saying, okay, to the state, we have an overlay district, it's 50 acres, we can make it larger, we can make that whole thing the.
Well, you can just make 50 in there.
Right, but
You
you
don't
have,
even
there's
half of it,
100
yeah.
acres, you can do what you need to do. That's what we're required to do. We're not worried about developing it and access and it's not that we're saying we're in favor of that development, but
I think you would almost guarantee that that wouldn't pass town meeting. That's my only concern with that. I completely think that's a great path to go down and explore, Dorian, but I would almost guarantee that would fail town meeting.
again, we can't get sued if we try. And the town votes it down, but we tried, we had the acreage,
So-
and, I mean,
So I think we need to all decide whether we actually want to comply, whether we actually want to see these units being built. Do we want multifamily housing in Southborough? Do we want the 10% affordable? Or do we want to take an avenue that this can't happen? So I think that's a decision that we all need to make before, because I think if we do these Dell properties, that this will happen, we will have multifamily
that
housing.
would be my first choice, because Shopsy definitely wants something developed. We've been working very hard at pulling all the pieces together to get something to go forward with. I'm just saying, if we have to comply with the state, and they're being ridiculous, in my opinion, that's fine. Okay, let's do what we have to do, but figure out where we can get affordable housing in town, because we desperately need it.
Who does?
Kathy?
Yep.
To that point, I know Dorian or Tom, do you want to speak about the, the Corderville, the 21 Highland Street and how that affects, because I think there was an important analysis in there about, the existing zoning obstacles to turning that into affordable housing?
Yeah, if I could, you want me to speak to that?
Jesse?
Because I think you're saying that your current plans do not want to cite the new district there, but I think there's
So
something.
one of the things, I'm not sure if the select board's had a chance to review, we just finally got out our 21 Highland report a couple of weeks ago, so I don't know if people have had a chance to digest it yet. But one of the takeaways from it, we did a pretty deep dive into the zoning on the 21 Highland site, but the conclusions apply townwide as well, which is that there really isn't any mechanism in our current zoning for a multifamily housing project like, we're looking at 21 Highland, maybe creating 15 to 30 units. There's no mechanism in our zoning right now to enable that to happen. So I think I'm probably against the stream here in thinking that we should have some mechanism in our zoning for the creation of affordable housing in some places. I mean, I missed the discussion earlier. I think I agree with that. We don't want our town overrun with multifamily housing, but we do have a housing crisis in Southborough specifically and in Massachusetts in general, which is the whole purpose of the MBTA community zoning. I apologize for coming in late, but I hope that all of us here and all these boards are taking into consideration the real public policy purposes behind the MBTA statute, which is, on a state level, it's becoming an existential problem for the state. The state is losing population, it's losing its workforce for reasons that are attributable in large part to the high cost of living, the high cost of housing in Massachusetts. So one of the main purposes of the MBTA Community Act is to create more housing, dense housing that will add more units of housing to the inventory, which does a couple of things. One, in any community, more inventory releases some pressure on the market. So if nothing else, there is more inventory. That helps somewhat with the high cost of housing. Secondly, the nature of the housing is such that it's a lower cost product. You know, our regular developers in town can build 4,000 square foot houses on a half acre of land and get $1 million for them. They can't get $1 million for a 2 to 3 bedroom condo or apartment in a multifamily unit. So it creates more housing and more entry points for people who, in towns that need the housing. And at a state level, the whole idea of it being close to mass transit is that it creates additional benefits of let's just say there's 200 people who would live in that multifamily housing within a half mile of the MBTA station. Those people would be encouraged to take the train into town if they live downtown. Instead of having 200 cars on the road, it releases traffic on the streets and it reduces pollution. So there are a lot of laudable public policies behind this MBT community law that I think we, as a town of Southborough, should take seriously and should try to implement it in a real way and not on a sort of end-around way. What's the minimum we can get away with, and maybe we can get away with already counting this. I personally think that we should implement this in the way that it was intended to be implemented. So I would encourage, you know, us as the body of the planning board to look at zones where we really would, across the town, want to accommodate multifamily housing, and where would be the right places to do that, because I think the town could use affordable housing. You know, I think people like, I don't know, look at me and Andrew, who are sort of similarly situated. You know, I came here 20 years ago with just me and my wife when we were able to buy a house, and that was at an earlier point in my career and in my life, and I had kids, and they went to the school systems, and we got involved in our church, and we got roots, and I got involved in town government. I think a lot of people on this board and in this room, that's a familiar story. But I think us of 20 years ago can't come into Southborough now. There's no entry point. My salary from 30 years ago, the equivalent today, wouldn't be able to afford the house that I bought 20 years ago. And I think multifamily housing is a way to create that entry point for all of us who came here 20 years ago to get back into the town of Southborough. They can't afford the $950,000 houses that are up there. And without that mechanism in our zoning bylaw for multifamily housing, our developers' only option, they want to create 20 more units, is to clear cut 10 more acres of virgin and diminishing forest land in Southborough to create 20 more 20 more house lots, single family house lots. If we allow more multifamily housing, it's more efficient. They can get those 20 units on 2 acres of development, not 20 acres of development. So I think there are a lot of reasons why we should try to implement this in a real way.
Can I ask a question? So, Mimi, with the MBTA communities and creating an overlay, is there the ability to, and again, kind of piggybacking on your point, Tom, I agree there's a huge housing deficit in Southborough, but I think it's more than just the 80% median income. I think, is there the ability, and maybe you don't know the answer to this, through this overlay to actually lower to say 60%, you know, to actually be able to allow that single mom, you know, we've talked about this before, that senior that can't afford to stay in Southborough any longer. Do we have the ability? And if not, if you don't know, maybe that's something we can ask council. I think it's Framingham has actually done a 60%. And again, I don't know if this is something that's allowable, but I certainly would be interested in finding a way to truly make it affordable.
I can add 2 seconds to that, just because we looked at the MBT community bylaws a lot when we did the 21 Highland. So there is a mechanism in the DHCD guidelines for the MBT community districts that, you know, it's not designed to be an affordable housing law, but it does allow for towns to include an affordability component as part of the new zoning district that's created. But they won't allow more than
10%.
I think 10% to be required to be affordable. And then the maximum income limits are 80% of AMI. So you couldn't do 60% of AMI under the MBTA zoning. But 80% of AMI is still good. And by the way, even with no affordability restrictions, you know, if there are $650,000 units instead of $950,000 houses or $1 million houses, we're still getting a product that is more accessible to people coming into town, in my opinion.
So Tom, I don't remember when you came in either, so I'm going to say something that you may not have heard. I don't think anyone, I'm looking at everyone, disagrees with the statement that we need more affordable housing in Southborough. We know that when we did the budget this year, that we believe that the average price of a house in Southborough right now as of 1/1/23 is $902,000. So we get that, right? What we're quibbling with, if we're quibbling, is the speed that this would be added and the impact it would have on roads, schools, services. So the math would, you could, even being conservative with every other unit having one kid, would add an enormous amount of children to the school system. And we're in the middle of trying to figure out what to do with our school system. And we, so far, have not underwritten any increase because of either of the projects, the Park Central 40B or this one. So I think that all we're quibbling with maybe is a matter of degree, instead of going like this, more like this, so get the slope down a little bit, because to try to absorb all that, they built these things fast, right? Once they get in, they're gonna go up really fast.
Well, the zoning district, again, it's zoning, so, theoretically, it's gonna go over portions of the town that already have houses and people already living in them, so they won't go up immediately, unless you do something like Dell.
Well, that's what we're
AMC,
talking about,
but
that's
if
what we're
you
talking
did it in
about.
so that's one possibility, so,
Yeah.
but generally speaking, just zoning something, our downtown district is a good example, that's, we hope for good things in the future, but it takes time for cycles to go through and properties to become available and a developer to buy the property and put a project together, that all takes time. But also back to your point, I honestly don't know the statistics, but I've thought that our school-age population has been declining over the past several years. I know that.
It started declining, so we built the 4 schools, 2002 or
Yeah.
so, and it went up for a while, that's why we added the 4th school, and it's been going down since then. It's kind of leveled off, so we've done demographic studies that basically think it's going to be fairly level between now and 2030, and that's what is being underwritten in this project with MSBA. So, what you're proposing is not, so planning board's thoughts right now is to put the big chunk of this on the EMC DLN, 47 acres out of the 50. We've got to do 10 around the commuter rail station, right? But the other 40 can be elsewhere. Ms. Braccio and Don Morris got that taken care of. They got them to relax where the 50 acres was. It was originally going to all be around a half mile from the commuter rail station. But that 40, so right now, that's where they're heading, is to put in the 40, so it would go up real fast because of where they're talking about putting.
So-
Yeah, yeah. Yeah.
Well, I just wanted to underscore, and I don't know when you came in the meeting, but that I think it is important to look at the report that you and Jesse and Alex and Joe did on 21 Highland, and just, there's a really good discussion there about how from a practical standpoint, it becomes almost impossible to develop any affordable housing at that site without some change to the existing zoning bylaws, and that's where it does seem to make sense to, look at the case to be made for citing at least some part of the MBTA communities by right zone there. And in an earlier part of the discussion, what Mimi was talking about is there may be some flexibility on the state's part that would allow you to actually put the entire district on the Dell site and nothing close to the
But see,
MBTA.
I see
Okay.
that as being counter to the purpose of the bylaw. So part of the reason for it being within a half mile of the train station is theoretically so that people who work in town can walk to the train station and have a very short commute to the train station and keep the cars off the roads, and they're encouraged to use the commuter rail and mass transit. So
Well, so people live down there, Tom. Do they have cars? Do you think that because and it's not public transportation, it's a commuter rail, so it doesn't keep people from buying cars and being on the roads. You're not taking the commuter rail to go grocery shopping or go to the doctor's office. So, that's kind of a misnomer.
presumably their doctor's office is not downtown, and not taking the Mass Turnpike and adding, in my hypothetical, hundreds of cars from Southborough onto the Mass Turnpike, where maybe more of those people. And I think it's also, I realize people live there now, but the idea of the MBTA communities bylaw is to create more new dense housing so that new residents are coming in those areas close to the commuter rail station, and that those people will be encouraged to move someplace out in Southborough, which is 30 miles away from town, because of its proximity to the commuter rail. They would be, one of the reasons they'd be moving there in that housing theoretically would be its proximity to the commuter rail. That's a theory. I mean, who knows how the way it works in real life, but that's the public policy theory behind it.
Can I just add one thing to that point? So I completely understand where you're going, what you're saying, but something Mimi said earlier has struck a chord as well. Those are the more affordable homes in Southborough now. With this MBTA communities, there's no guarantee of affordability. You could, other than, okay, potentially I'll give you the 10%, but you could see a high-rise potentially go up that, because it's close to the train, has a higher value as well. So you could be potentially losing a home, and again, I'm not arguing for or against the MBTA, but just statistically, you could be losing a home that's, $300,000, say. A smaller home in its place could be something that could turn around and sell. We've seen a lot of affordable, not affordable, but multifamily for the housing. Some of those multifamilies go in and they sell for $700,000. So,
Let's play that out. The
Yeah.
house is down there, a house within a half mile of the train station. Even if it's an older house, that house is selling for $700,000 today. If they put it on the market, $700,000, I think they're probably gonna be getting that. But let's just play it out. 3 of those house lots get sold to a developer 10 years from now, and that developer puts up a 20-unit multifamily housing unit. Now we have 20 more affordable units of housing where we used to have 3.
Okay.
And it's a higher number of products that get added to the market. And again, by its very nature, those units aren't going to be $700,000 because it's a 2 or 3 bedroom condo, not a single family home on its own lot. By its nature, it's going to be less expensive. So I think we come out ahead in that equation. If we lose some of the affordable, less expensive houses down there, but in place put in some nice multifamily housing, I think we come out ahead.
I think the goal, we need to understand is, what is the goal do we want? How many units, any units, at what time frame, right? Because we're talking, fighting it for 0. We're talking going instantly to 750, right? Which is the max. To Tom's point, you could put it in an existing neighborhood with houses already, and, if you put it in a subdivision that has $1 million, $1.5 million houses, the economics to buy a 1-acre lot, tear down a $1.5 million house and put in development might not be there. So that takes longer for that to progress. So I think what we should be looking at is, what is the goal? How many units do we want to have over what time period? And then that'll dictate the properties that the overlay should be on, or the areas that could, we want open land that is instantly developable, that is, perks, that's ready to go, and you can put 750 units in tomorrow. Great, okay, we want 750 units, we'll do that. Or we put it in an existing neighborhood in which it's gonna take longer for that to progress, or we, get creative and make it a little bit more difficult. Maybe it's rockier terrain, or, the elevation changes and you can't build as easily, right? There's a lot of options you have to develop the zone to exactly what you want to deliver. But I think what we should be focusing on is, what do we want to deliver? How many units? I think a 20% increase in our housing stock instantly is unsustainable. That's impossible. So I think we need to find somewhere in there where we can comply, maybe, and maybe we don't need to comply, but somewhere between instantly giving 750 units to a developer at EMC, right? And even if we did the 47 at EMC and let them do the 4 at South Union, right, that gets us to the 50, maybe they allow us to do that, but that's a lot instantly, right? That's 20 units there, 700 units there. That's a lot added to this town versus, putting it in more creative areas. That's going to be a little slower. Maybe not as many units can be built there, but it doesn't get as much housing production, but it gets us closer to our goal, whatever the goal is. And I think that's what we should be discussing is, what do we see in terms of the number of units over a period of time, and then we can get creative on how do we do that with our existing housing stock, our existing zoning, in terms of the size of the lots or the the properties are there, the value of them, when did they just get renovated or rebuilt or new? And then we can determine where in that scale that needs to be.
We have to also remember that the South Union falls outside of that half a mile of the train station.
Is that for sure?
No, it's within half a mile.
I thought your report said it
6/10 of a
was.
mile?
I've always measured as being less.
Yeah, it's like 3/10 of a mile.
So when we started when Shopsy started looking at it, we did the preliminary maps. Sarah had actually talked to the DHCD or someone at the MBTA's, and it was 6/10 of a mile, and we would have to get special permission to include that. Doesn't mean we wouldn't give it to us, but it was just outside of that half a mile.
It's 6/10 if you drive it from the most furthest spots, but
So
as the
all
crow
of it
fly,
was
it's like,
included.
as
Okay.
crow flies, it
Google Maps from
Correct.
right in the middle of the train station to the
There,
farthest end
yeah.
of the site.
It's
and
like
that was something like
4/10, they get, yeah.
It seemed like.
But the road, like you have to go like way up and around and
Right,
down.
they do it that way.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess you get there, but I don't think they measure it that way. I
I think it's crow flies. It's a circle.
That's something we would need, I'm gonna make a call,
Okay, because that would be helpful to get that.
because it was 6/10 before.
If I may, just,
Go ahead.
Doug Vans on with Shopsy. I don't want to repeat a lot of things that are said, but, you know, we definitely have a housing crisis, and we all admit that. I definitely think we should be looking at meeting the intent of the law, right? I think it's important. I live on the south side of town. I actually walk to the commuter rail 3 times a day. Used to be 5 times a day. There are a lot of people that do walk to the commuter
A
rail.
day or a week?
Three times a week, sorry.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, 3 times a week.
Yeah.
Twice a day. Twice a day. Both ways.
Yeah, an interesting
Both
job
ways.
there.
I'll tell both ways.
So I will say that we moved to Southborough
That's right,
because of the schools and because of the commuter rail station, right? And so I don't have to sit in the pike going to the commuter rail station. So 10 acres is not a lot of area, right? So I would implore these boards to really think about including the 10 acres. I do think if you really want, 21 Highland to be developed into an affordable housing community, I think you should include that in the overlay too as well. The town owns and controls it too, by the way. So it doesn't have to be 15 units per acre actually developed on it, right? Because it's actually owned by us. So I think that's important. I think there's some really good points. I mean, the EMC parcel is a really good parcel, right, for part of this, right? To your point, maybe it's not all of it, right? Maybe there's a third location in town type of thing, could be split up a little bit more. But, my kids won't be able to afford this town. There are no townhomes, there are no apartments, it's very hard, so, or I don't have a place to go for me to give them my house if I want to stay in town too, either, right? So, I think it's just about us taking our fair share or burden. I know it's very complicated for a lot of people, or, concerning for a lot of people. I don't think any of us want this all within 3 years either, right? Because that would be a pretty big burden pretty quickly, so. But I would say, the way you guys propose most of this on the south side of Southfield Road, right? I mean, it's a strip, right? I mean, so anyway, I thought the planning board maps this was at least, going in the right direction, right? So, but it doesn't feel genuine to me for this town to be like, well, we're trying to get out of this, right? I think we should honestly try to do it in a way that, puts the impact over time, and we have more control over it. Because I think that's, at least that's what I think would be an appropriate way to do it, so. But not to put all 50 acres around the station, that doesn't make sense. Most of it's very developed and built. But let's go with the 10. I'm also trying to make it easy for the state, too. We don't want to be in the crosshairs, I just think we should, but this is a unique opportunity, but I think at least the planning board's in the right direction. And I do agree we should do the 10% affordable housing, right? And I know that with Chapter 40B, you can do a preference, at least a 70% preference for local town employees and people already in the town, which I think is very important too as well, to try to get us back to a little bit of balance with still maintaining the character of our town. So those are at least my thoughts.
All right, so to, again, be clear, I think the 10 acres is a lot different than the 47. The 10 would probably take a long time to develop. You'd buy it house by house, so that might work out well. It'd be the gradual slope, right? You say you came to town because of the schools. This huge impact to the schools of developing the 47 acres at Dell, I think, would be unpalatable to most. Again, with this project that we've got on the table, this is not factored in at all. So, if we build the school for the wrong size, and then this happens, I mean, that would be not a good thing, right? So I still
Wouldn't
think
be
we
the
gotta focus
first
on
time.
excuse me? What, Mimi? What, Mimi?
It said it wouldn't be the first time.
Well, let's try not to do it again. So I think we've got to focus on the Dell piece, because that's going to get built. If this is the overlay, I mean, are you guys, it's going to get built really fast. And so we're going to immediately have this huge increase in population that's going to dump the traffic out onto Route 9 in the morning that's already backed up with traffic. So they're not going to walk to the commuter rail station. They're going to get in the cars, right? So I don't know if you guys had any alternatives to this one, or you could pick one of the three lots, or two of the three lots, and not necessarily, or three of them. But I just don't see how we absorb 750 units one time.
Does Dell EMC get developed regardless of whether we adopt an MBTA community?
I mean, because you could just do a 40B there.
Right, so I mean, I don't know that the decision to put on this MBTA community zoning district is going to factor into those new units that are coming online.
Oh, it absolutely has factored in.
Well,
They
I think it would be
have a tremendous
easier.
amount of interest in these parcels because they think that's what we're going to do. That's why the bids came in. They actually came in
Because they think we're gonna
contingent.
zone it.
They came in contingent on us doing this. So those bids were received. Now, I don't know if Dale's going to accept those that way. They may go back and say, after they've heard all this, they're probably listening tonight. After they've heard all this, they may say, look, there's no guarantee that we're going to do this, and so therefore, we want to get this sold. We're not going to take that contingency. But that's where this interest is coming from, because they think that's what we're going to
They
do.
can't do as a 40B on.
Oh, they could, the others could, I'm not sure that they haven't gotten a bid for 40B doing a piece of it, but the vast majority has been with the assumption we're going to put the MBTA overlay district right there.
Well, I think, so if we did an overlay there, it'd be much easier for them to develop that with the by right overlay than to,
It'd be better for us, though.
On a
too, because
40B.
then we could control it. You know, a 40B overrides our zoning. If we adopted the zoning, at least you all, the planning board and the ZBA could have more control over how it's carried out, if they have to do it under our zoning as opposed to a 40B.
So how much control would you have if this were to be the district? They could save 40 acres times 15, 600 units there, right? How much control would you then have over what actually got built there?
well, it depends on what you write into the zoning. And we would also require site plan review.
You would be writing a lot more things into the zoning district that are not, they're not subject to if they did a 40B project.
And if you write too much into it, this is another caution from Jay today, so I think this is my last caution. He said, when I was asking about whether it's a majority vote or a two-thirds vote, he said, be careful. Try to encourage everyone to keep this article simple and only focus on MBTA so you know you got a majority vote. If you start adding stuff onto it, that it might turn it into a two-thirds vote. That's what's happened to some towns, is they added stuff onto it, they made it a two-thirds vote.
Well, yeah, you have to keep it as multifamily. If you start throwing in other things like mixed use or something, then it's, well, I think mixed use might be, but other things, that's where you get into trouble.
So Andrew teed it up pretty well as far as what I think we've got to decide tonight. Number one, it doesn't sound like when people said that we've got the appetite to opt out right now and just say, we'll see what happens. Anybody disagree with that? So we believe you should go forward as if we need to comply by 12/31/24 and do the work that needs to be done to do it. Jay says, keep in mind, things are going to go on. Liz Lyden in his office is the one in their office that is basically monitoring all this. So she's got all the information that she's seeing. So she'll be our resource as far as what she sees, what she thinks will affect us here. But you go forward. And then, based on so you got what Tom says, and you got what others have said. Tom has said, sort of, put it there. I think others are saying, we put it there, we've really got a problem as far as the, immediate impact to town. Services, schools, roads, everything. And it'd be hard to absorb that fast.
Kathy, can I suggest
Yep.
a parallel approach? I mean, it seems to me, again, that the right path is to assume it's going to happen. The question is, how can it happen? How can we make it work that is acceptable to us for a variety of reasons? And the one option is, as I think has been proposed, is to look at the Dell property and assume that's going to happen relatively quickly, potentially, if it does, and explore the zoning bylaw overlay requirements. Can we do things with that overlay zoning that will allow some degree of control of the speed of development there? And simultaneously look for other options in terms of other zoning approaches, overlay approaches, that by its nature, as Andrew was suggesting, I think that you can't develop quickly, but it would be a reasonable result at the end over a course of years as properties turn over and so forth. And look at both paths and see, does one stand out to say, wow, this looks really good, or oops, there are problems here that we just didn't anticipate, and we really, if it turns out we can't control speed through a zoning overlay for a property like Dell, then that makes the other approach more acceptable, I think, because again, I remain concerned, not only from my current seat, but my years on the advisory committee, the impact of a sudden influx of school population would be a real difficult thing to deal with financially for us, unfortunately. So I think you got to meter it out one way or another. And I think there are a couple of ways that that might work. So I'd like to see both, at least initially explored, and then make a decision as we get farther down that path with better information to say, here's the one we choose.
So an overlay on presidential, that's what you're saying?
That's right. There's plenty of space in my backyard, so put it in
It'll
there.
never be
50,
built, so.
I'm thinking 50 stories.
I do think it does make sense, though, if we can get a ruling on the unfunded mandate, right? It doesn't cost us anything to send it to the state auditor and just get something back that stated is or it isn't, and we can decide to do nothing with it, but I think it would be good for us to know that.
What's the downside of doing that? I don't see
There's
any,
none.
right? Does anybody agree with this? So I think we should absolutely pursue, just, let's see what happens, right? As far as that goes. So Mimi, do you think the planning board is willing to try to look at more options than just the 47 acres here?
Absolutely, I said, it's a draft.
Okay,
And South Union is in the half mile.
okay, good.
Yeah, I would think that's something we would suggest if you guys could also consider including the South Union School
Okay.
as part of
So
it.
it would either have to connect down, or it would have to be 5 acres there, and it's only 3, I think.
4.
Well,
Listed
it's,
as 3, but it's really
3.7 is what the assessor says.
You could connect it down through the church, through St. Matthews, back to Southville, and back down.
It doesn't have to be contiguous into the train station, does it? Just has to be.
well, each zone has to be a minimum of 5 acres.
Oh, yeah, I'm saying if they,
So if we wanted to do yeah.
Is it the worst thing in the world to encompass in the zones some areas that have existing houses on it?
Well, you have to think about trying to get past at town meeting.
Yeah, but I mean, any zoning district or overlay district is by almost definition going to include areas where they're already developed.
Tom, can you talk closer to the microphone?
sorry.
And can I ask a question on South Union? In the report, you included Land in there? Southborough Open Land Foundation, you included it in the site area?
Yeah, so there's 2 different sites that make that up. One is owned by the town of Southborough, which is, I think, boy, I'm forgetting the numbers. I finished writing this and then.
3
cleared
acres.
it away. 3 acres. And then there's another strip next to it, which is Southborough Open Land Foundation. So I was considering in the report, the site being both of those parcels together.
But, so I'm asking why, does Southborough Open Land Foundation know that you're including that in a development site?
I was assuming that was owned by the town of Southborough.
No, that's
No.
a private land trust, and they don't usually develop their land.
Okay.
Well, the question is whether or not you can include that in zoning district.
So that would be excluded from the MBTA communities, because it's land trust land.
So that answers that one.
Was that because of the definition of developable land under the DHCD guidelines?
Yeah.
Because went and looked at that hard, and maybe this is a question for Jay, but there is a definition of developable land in the DHCD guidelines. But I don't believe that in determining the minimum zoning size, it has to be developable land. The 50 acres doesn't all have to be developable land, I don't believe, because under the same criteria, any public land is excluded.
think it
So
does.
that would exclude the South Union School, that would exclude South Union as developable land, because they don't meet the definition of developable land. Any public land that's already devoted to another public use other than housing does not count towards the definition of developable land in the DHCD guidelines. But we should take another look at that, because I was under the same impression, and I told that to the subcommittee, and when I look back and looked at it again, I think the definition of developable land only comes in as an alternative to the minimum zone district, because a minimum of 50 acres, or I think it's like 1.5% of the total amount of developable land in the town. And that's where the definition of developability comes into play in the guidelines. I don't believe if you do have 50 acres and you have a town that's got more developable land, and that 50 acres is not, doesn't exceed the town's developable land, then your 50 acres is not developable. I believe that, Mimi, but we can go back and look at that. I looked at that hard, and that was the conclusion I came to. But what do I know? I'm just
But I think the main takeaway is that, I don't know if you would agree that a decision not to include the South Union property in the MBTA communities zone is almost close to a deal breaker for any actual practical attempt to actually even consider it for
It would be more advantageous, but I mean, a community development corporation could come in and just do it as 40B.
Okay,
That's the other option. But it would be,
harder.
it would be better, I think, if it were zoned for multifamily.
Jesse, you had your hand up earlier. You want to put it back up? think
I was just wondering why Lisa thought that the Park Central site would not pass a town meeting for meeting the acreage requirement, because Lisa, it just seems like if by that point it seemed like it was going to be developed anyway, it does actually seem to me palpable to town meeting to accept it that way. And sort of, at that point, why not have it as the acreage?
The qualifying phrase, Jesse, is what's key here. If Park Central is going to happen, and it's far enough along that it looks like it's going to happen, then why wouldn't you want to do this? That's Dorian's point. It's a good point. Lisa's point is,
Well,
if it's
yeah,
not
and
far
Lisa
enough,
had-
yeah, and if it's
and
not
I'm
far
always-
enough, the town will say no because they don't want Park Central.
And of course, I'm always cognizant about what is possibly going to pass at town meeting. So, Lisa, what was your thought on that?
Well, Jesse, I guess my thought on it was, obviously, Park Central has been controversial, as we're all well aware. It sits closely abutted by neighborhoods, and I know there was concern from residents regarding 200 units. So I'm just thinking larger scale, to be able to put an overlay there. What would stop the developer, I guess, and from wanting to increase the number of units
Oh, okay.
that they
So
could
your
put there
point
by
being-
right?
Okay, so your point being it would actually increase, got it. Thank you for clarifying that.
You're welcome.
And then, Mr. Pfaff, when you had mentioned an unfunded mandate, I might be misinterpreting what that means, but how is it unfunded if we're going to be getting property tax revenue from the site in question?
So anytime the state mandates something, right, it could be unfunded. Like there was a unfunded mandate for the increasing the poll hours for the early voting, right? So a lot of towns went back to the state for that one, which I think they ended up funding. But the unfunded mandate would be to increase basically our housing stock by 20-something%, which is 25 is the max. I think we're 22 or something. I don't remember the calculation. Which, if we increase our taxes 20% basically by the number of services, the number of school children, and also these properties, because the value isn't high enough to cover the costs. So I think on average, it needs to be $1 million or $1.2 million. I haven't done the calculation in a couple of years in order to make enough taxes for the average home to cover the tax basis. So we basically would be putting additional burden on the existing homeowners because of the assessed value of those properties. So so it's basically a Prop 2.5 kind of increase because the state's mandating this. So that's why. And the auditor comes through and he does the calculation and he decides whether or not it truly is a mandate, unfunded mandate or not. So.
Thanks for clarifying that.
Yep.
So it looks like maybe we've gone as far as we can tonight, planning board. So you've got your work cut out for you, for sure.
Yep. So Kathy, before we go, one thing that is, yeah, I watched one of the DHCD presentations on it earlier today to educate myself. And one thing they did mention is they will do a preliminary review, takes 90 days. You could basically send them your idea and they'll come back with an unofficial review. Because otherwise they won't approve it till after it's gone through town meeting, you've done all this work, and they might even say at that point, no, and you're back to the drawing board. So if we have ideas about saying, hey, you know, we want to do just the 47, or we want to do the 47 and 4 instead of 40 and 10, or we want to, you know, get a little bit creative with them, you know, I suggest we sooner rather than later submit it to them and just say, hey, what do you think about this? And give them 90 days to come back. And it's not binding, it's not official, but it'd be nice to have some feedback.
Yeah. Working on the compliance model now.
I have a question.
Talk in the microphone.
Park Central, doesn't the Park Central property run along the 495? So what if we were to make the overlay district there? It's going to be developed at some point. And we went to the state and said, we want to do the MBTA communities there, make that our area, and asked them if they'd give us access off the 495. Because when MathWorks was going to go in there, weren't they going to have access, and then they took it away when they sold the property?
So that request was already made previously to be an out instead of coming, you know, through the neighborhood. And the answer was no at that time. I don't know if the answer would still be no.
But if we're trying to comply with the MBTA communities, and that's, if the EMC falls through and that's really our only option, wouldn't it be worth revisiting that and asking the state?
So I believe, Dorianne, the developer pursued that, since I've been on the board anyway, and found it wasn't feasible for the number of cars that would actually go out under 495 to be able to put a ramp on there. It was explored. And again, I could probably pull up the exact reasoning and get back to you, but I know it was discussed and the developer found it wasn't feasible to do it that way.
Well, I was just saying because it's possibly the MBTA communities to comply, I'm just,
You would think
that would be a good
make sense
reason.
if the
Yeah.
Department of Transportation would communicate with the Department of Housing and Urban Development. I don't think it
just
works that
throwing it
way.
out there.
Well, so this was 40B, which,
Even though that
this was 40B, which was also a state mandate.
Right.
And it did,
Trying.
it didn't work then.
Okay.
All right,
So look at everything, is that our marching orders?
marching orders, and get back to us ASAP.
What they say. That's what I heard. Get back to everyone next week.
Okay. Thank everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm going to adjourn the SHOP-C meeting. I need a roll call. Okay. Tom?
Second.
Jesse?
Aye.
Okay, Tom?
Aye.
Doug? Dorianne? Aye.
I vote aye, too.
Oh, yeah.
Do I have a motion to adjourn?
I'm not counting you, I'm second.
That's okay.
Latrell, yes? Mr. Stein?
Stein, yes?
Houlihan, yes.
Demuria, yes.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Post the resume. Online today, right? It's there. All right. Okay, so looking out, it looks like most of the people that are here for regional dispatch. So stay with us. The rest of what we got to do before we get to is not going to take that long, so just be patient for a few minutes. Okay, so reports. Chair's report, the only thing I'm going to add to what's not here is this afternoon, we did interview a candidate for our DPW superintendent. The interview went very well. The board voted 4-0. Ms. Braccio abstained. She was not there. 4-0 to attempt to enter into a contract with him. So we are optimistic and hopeful that we may have this one done. So we'll keep everybody tuned. His name is William Cundiff. Goes by Bill. He is currently the Spencer Utilities and Facilities Department, so he's got quite a broad portfolio, so it may have even been broader than what Karen had here. He's got facilities also. He is a professional engineer, worked for Douglas for 21 years as an engineer. and seems to be pretty excited about this job. Interview went very well. There were several people there from the DPW who listened, so they got to hear it firsthand. So resume is posted online if anybody wants to take a look, but there's your update on that one. Okay? All right, Andrew, members report.
Yes. Mr. Stivers and I had an office hours last week, was it? Yep. And I think the main point of just including this on the members report here is just to remind people about the select board does have office hours. We tried to do it, was it once a month or once every other month? And I think one takeaway from one comment we had at the office hours was about the process that we would follow after the town meeting approved the article about municipal voting age, to get some further information about like a 101 on how to submit a home rule petition to the state legislature. So I think that's something that we should have town council look into.
And we're going to talk about that when we get to the town meeting.
Okay.
Agenda
So
item.
this is the first time ever I've had 3 members' reports.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay.
You're in a row.
All very different. The second one was just to put on everyone's radar screen the finalized report that the Shopsy Capital Planning Committee, Subcommittee on 21 Highland Street did, and we already had a pretty long discussion about it there, so I think it's on people's radar screens. Guess one other thing, at the end of the last Shopsy meeting where the report was presented and voted to be approved, there was a discussion about, okay, what next? What are some next steps that the town could make to kind of spur potential interest in developing this? And one item that was discussed was maybe potentially funding a feasibility study to have an architect or someone say, okay, how really rough ballpark, how much would it cost to try to rehab this into affordable housing? Now, I know that there was another investigation at the same topic a couple years ago where there was an article on the town meeting warrant to look into disposing of the property. So I don't know what the next step is, but just wanted to alert the board that that's, maybe put that on the radar screen for consideration.
So we've got, looking at the report, talking about the report on the April 25th agenda, so there's no reason not to talk about what you just said at the same time.
Okay.
Okay.
And the third, it came from a story I saw while I was reading the Boston Globe sports section, which was on page B4 or D5 of the sports section. There was, before the Final Four, there was a great story on Alex Karaban, who is a basketball player for the UConn men's basketball team that won the national championship. And so because I read the story, I was definitely rooting for UConn, and they won. And there was a great last paragraph in the story where he highlighted that his Southborough roots and said, I'm proud to be from Southborough. Southborough really raised me into the type of person I am today. So I thought that was a great little thing I read in the newspaper while I was having my coffee and breakfast, and just wanted to thank Mr. Karaban. I don't know whether we tried to reach him or his family to let them know we were going to recognize them, but I guess we don't know whether they still live in Southborough. But wanted to highlight that resident's accomplishment.
Very good. That's a good one. Mr. Purple.
Thank you. Just a couple of quick items. One, I had let the board know previously that Mark McLaughlin, our most senior heavy equipment operator down at DPW, has submitted his retirement. His last day is actually going to be this Wednesday, so I just wanted to publicly thank him for everything that he's done for the town for the last 28 years. Again, big shoes to fill. So thank you, Mark, for everything that you have done for the town. Secondly, as you also may be aware, Governor Healy did approve the legislation passed by the House and Senate for a immediate needs bond bill, but it also included some extension of some of the pandemic-related authorizations related to public meeting and outdoor dining. The important pieces, the most important piece for us is that remote and hybrid meeting options for public bodies will continue through March 31st, 2025. So those boards and the committees that have been continuing to, that have been meeting remotely, that will be allowed to happen. Boards and committees that have been meeting in person but allowing this hybrid option to allow people to participate remotely will still be in place for the next couple of years. So hopefully the state gets this figured out so we don't have to keep looking at these extensions. The final piece, just a couple of things, an update. Earth Day is coming up, April 22nd, it's a Saturday. A couple of annual events that happen around that time. DPW is working again with Rotary Club for the 31st annual cleanup. It is headquartered, run out of the DPW from 8:30 till 11:30 a.m. You can stop down, pick up bags, pick out a street, where you'd like to clean up, and it's usually fairly well attended. The flyer just came out today, and it says that coffee and treats will be served down at DPW at 8:30, and then other volunteers for pizza and ice cream in front of the Southborough Library at 12 p.m. So, sounds like you do some work, you get fed. Also, Conservation is doing its 4th annual Earth Day poster contest. Ms. Danza said details are going to be released this week, so we will be pushing those out as soon as we get them. And Open Space Preservation Commission is doing their Planet Palooza based on what they've done in past years. They've done some guided walks, some presentations about nature. There was also outdoor concert, garden tours, things like that. So more information will be coming, but it appears that there will be some events going on to help celebrate Earth Day on the 22nd.
Thank you. Good report. All right, consent agenda. We've got A through J. Anyone want to hold A, minutes?
Yes.
All right, B, C. I want to hold C. D, E, I want to hold E, F, G, H,
Hold on
okay,
March 7th.
and January 17th, too. I and J, right?
I was not going to hold the executive session minutes from January 17th.
I said I would, yeah, so I'm doing that, you're doing the March, I'm doing January. I'll explain why when we get to that one. Okay, so we're going to hold A, C, E, and H, okay? All right, so I will make a motion to approve consent agenda items B, D, F, G, I, and J.
Second.
All in favor? Okay, 5-0. Okay, Sam, you held A.
Yeah, March 7th, lines 50 and 52, Peter Lapine, misspelled.
Okay,
And line 59, one of our audience members will appreciate it, Mr. Defensant's name was misspelled. So fix that one, please. That's it.
okay, for that one, anything else?
Nope.
Anybody else?
On line 40, citizens, I think it should be
Which ones are you on?
March 7th.
Okay, all right.
Citizens. Sorry. I think the apostrophe should be after S, plural. Yep.
That's right, if it's plural.
Line 64, I think it's 5G instead of 5 parentheses G.
Okay,
Those are the only nitpicky edits that I
okay,
had.
that's for 7th. Sam, anything else for 21st, 31st?
Nope,
Okay.
that's it.
Andrew, anything else for 21st, 31st?
I did have a question about line 19 and the reference to, she stated National Grid is requesting to install underground service to a hand hole to provide, that's correct?
Handhold,
Okay.
yes.
Hand hole or hand hold?
Hold.
Hold?
HOLD.
Okay, it should be HOLD
He's right.
instead of hold.
Okay.
Okay. That's it?
That's it.
Okay, so I'll make a
Sorry, I have
Sorry,
to change on
Ch-
the 31st.
sorry, Chelsea.
Line 36, we'll just say Ms. Malinowski left the meeting because she was abstaining from the next agenda item.
Yes, we can.
Sorry. I'll say it again. So March 31st, can we change line 36 to say Ms. Malinowski left the meeting because she was abstaining from the next agenda item?
All right. Okay, so I'll make a motion to approve the amended minutes from March 7th, the 21st, and the 31st.
As amended?
As amended, I said amended.
Second.
Okay, all right, all in favor? 5-0. Okay, next one is to appoint Michelle Hutchinson as the Historical Commission's representative on the newly formed pilot committee. And the only reason I held that one, I just want to point out that that will give us a quorum for that committee, so that committee will be off to the races sometime in the near future. Okay, other than that, it's fine. Okay, so I'll make a motion to appoint Michelle Hutchinson as the Historical Commission representative to the newly formed pilot committee,
Second, with a term.
with the term ending, and I have no, what is,
6/30/23.
6/30/23.
Second.
Okay, any further discussion? All in favor? 5-0. So we now have a functioning pilot committee. All right, next one is the conflict of interest declaration from Christina, and I wanted Mark to explain this one.
I'm happy turning it over to the chief, since the chief is here.
That's true.
Yep.
Didn't see you sitting over there. Hi. Hello there. Good evening.
Yes, so we have a dispatch that works for the police department that is certified as an EMT. She has interest in becoming a call part-time member of our department. I spoke with Chief Newell. He's comfortable with it, very much like the constable agreements we have, where we have people that work for the fire department, work for police department, and vice versa. We were informed that because of a current employee that would work for police or fire, you need a disclosure according to Mass General Law. That was in my memo. We had the form, and it requires the select board to sign off.
Simple as that.
Simple as that.
Okay. Have we ever done this before?
I don't know, in my time we haven't, but again, I would say that the constable agreement that we had under Chief Paulus and I to have firefighters work for the police department would be similar.
Okay, good analogy. Any questions on this? Sam?
Nope.
Can't see you. All right, so Chelsea, you want to do the motion?
I move that we sign off on the conflict of interest disclosure form for Christina Stapleton.
Second.
Any further discussion? All in favor? 5-0. So
Thank you.
Done. Thank you, Chief. Okay, last one is the 2 sets of executive session minutes, one for January 17th, one for March 7th. So the only reason I'm holding January 17th is we're not ready, so all we're doing tonight is approving them and not necessarily releasing them. We can probably release March 7th.
I have substantive edits that I would make
Okay.
for March 7th.
All right. Okay, so, and then January 17th shouldn't be released yet because those involve the previous discussions or previous contract negotiations with our previous candidate for DPW, so those aren't ready to be released either. Okay, so I have no edits on the 17th, I just don't want them released.
I don't have any edits either.
Okay, all right, so now on the 7th? Yeah, so we'll hold them.
Yes.
Okay, all right, okay. All right, so that takes care of consent agenda.
So we need approving the 17th?
Yeah. Approve and not release.
Okay.
Correct.
All right, so I'll make a motion to approve but not release the January 17th, 2023 executive session minutes.
Second.
Okay, all in favor? Okay. All right, everybody ready? Okay, so moving on to other matters. The first one, we don't need anymore because we didn't know where we would end up with the DPW superintendent interview. Now we do. So we have officially voted to try to enter into a contract with them, so that item is no longer necessary. Okay. The next one is the continued discussion on the tricentennial committee. So Vanessa has basically taken our comments from last meeting and put them in good form. So, everybody have that in front of them? Okay, so let's just go through this and see where people want changes, edits, additions, deletions. Andrew?
To the committee charge for the,
Tricentennial Committee.
on the, okay, under members where it just says veteran,
Yeah?
I would say one resident who shall be a veteran.
Okay? Anything else?
Nope.
Nope. Lisa?
Nope.
Chelsea?
Yep.
I'm happy to too. I thought she did a great job. So, I'll make a motion to approve the committee charge for the Tricentennial Committee with the one edit by Andrew to change veteran to one resident who is a veteran.
Second?
Okay, any further discussion? Okay, all in favor? 5-0. All right, so we'll get that going. All right. Okay, next one is discussion of the next steps for the St. Mark's Street Park Committee and the project itself. Okay, so, as we know, we had a successful vote at town meeting on both Articles 12 and 13. 12 to basically approve the land swap, and 13 to approve the $250,000 of funding, which includes the design of the park. Okay, so now we got to decide tonight what to do next. So since the town meeting, Mark has been working closely with Jay Tellerman as far as the actual land swap, because there's quite a few details that have to be done to get it done. We've got to have appraisals, so they are working on that, and so I don't think there's much more to say about that. They will continue to work on that in parallel with working on the park itself. So they're taking care of the actual land swap, road discontinuance, et cetera. So I think that's under control. Okay, remember, we got a June deadline we're looking at here when the contractor comes back, so we got to keep pushing this forward to try to get all the Ts crossed and Is dotted for this. Everybody okay with that piece of it?
So does that include, like, traffic flow when we actually discontinue the road?
I don't know the answer to that.
I think once we get there, it will, in understanding how that's going to, the discontinuous, because I think it was, we've discussed this previously, is you can't just simply chop it off and.
Right, I mean, I think a lot of people cut through there, so we need to make
I
sure
agree.
that we're, like,
I
that we
think a
work
lot, I think
with.
a lot of people are already using the road that's been cut in as well.
Yeah, you can.
You see where the
Yeah.
buses park in the morning, so.
Okay.
yeah.
I just think we need to make sure we coordinate with Chief Newell on how we're going to coordinate that and give people ample notice that that's going to be.
Agree, Chief Newell. Okay. And of course, the work that's left to be done as far as the new road is probably going to go pretty fast once they get out there. You know, they're going to pave it, they're going to curb it. So I don't think that's going to take a crazy amount of time once they get out there. I don't know what order they're going to do things. They've got several things to do when they come back. That's one of the things they have to do. So I don't know what order, but we know that they're planning on coming back sometime in June. So we just need to be ready when they come out so we can finish that contract. Okay, now let's talk about the park itself. So we left off, we've shown the town a conceptual plan. Mark has been working with Greg Russell as far as taking that conceptual plan to a set of bid documents, so that's underway. The contract that we signed with VHB in August of 2020 was for $38,000, and it covered basically designing the project that took care of the water remediation, moving the road, and the initial park design, okay? That's what VHB has been using heretofore. So when you heard Greg on a couple of the committee meetings say, I've still got some money left, he's talking about that $38,000, right? So I don't know exactly where he stands. Mark is going to, Mark's staying in touch with them, so he's going to report back to us where they stand financially. But the $250 is going to include anything that we have to pay VHB to basically render the bid documents, right? Okay, so that's kind of the next step as far as the critical path here is getting those done. Then we've got to decide tonight what we want the working group to actually do from this point on. I think they're almost done as far as what we need. So one thought is to ask them to maybe meet one more time, take a look at Greg's engineered plans, and give them a chance to make comments on those. But it's got to happen pretty fast. You know, it won't be, it can't be 3 or 4 months. It's got to be literally, here they are, you got 2 weeks to come back with anything you'd like to see changed. I think they deserve that. They work so hard. They deserve a chance to look at the details, right? So is anybody, there, we've got one member here. So Andrew, I'm looking at you because you're the rep. So what do you want to do?
I'm also looking at Kevin, curious what he thinks as well. But I think that makes sense. But I also, with my kind of select board hat on, know that it needs to go fast. So this is not, it can't be a overly involved discussion. It's got to be kind of pretty quick.
Yeah,
Keep the
Marguerite's
bid
going to have to say,
documents.
guys, this is it, you know, get them ahead of time in the meeting, come to the meeting with changes that you'd like, agree upon those changes, report those to Greg, get them made,
Yep.
because the next step is to get this to the planning board. They've got to do the major site plan review, right? So it's got to go boom, 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 right? And you'll be at the meeting, so you will push it along, right?
Okay.
That's your job now, okay? You're on there for a reason. So everybody okay with that plan as far as getting the park ready to truly be built, okay? Then hopefully by the fall, we'll have the road done, the park done, and off to
And
the races.
before you move off this item, I want to remind you again about the $20,000 that's still in the ARPA.
That's next, okay, so, I hadn't forgotten, almost. So, remember we voted, a few meetings ago to give the working group $20,000 to work with until town meeting to get VHB to do what they need to do. They didn't need it, okay? And there was a lot of pushback on spending any money before town meeting approved the land transfer. So that money is still sitting, in our ARPA spreadsheet for that. So we never officially voted to put it back in the bucket it came from, and the bucket it came from was National Grid, just to know, Sam. So we took National Grid
was
down
happy
from
to help.
252 to 232, okay? So the question is, do we want to now put that back in a bucket, and which bucket do we want to put it back into? And I'm looking at Mr. Stivers, of course.
I have an opinion.
So, Chelsea, where would you like to put it back into?
FY '25 tax relief
Okay,
bucket.
so the big tax relief bucket.
Yeah.
Lisa?
Same.
Sam?
I can count the votes.
Andrew?
Tax relief.
Okay, you still have 232 in National Grid, in all seriousness, okay? So you still have most of it there.
Well, has there been any progress on trying to think about getting like a 21E?
Mr.
feasibility?
Purple said that he was going to look into that.
Yeah, I've been speaking with Bob Moran, who's our rep,
Okay.
and he's facilitating that conversation.
Great.
Good.
Thanks.
Thank you.
We're wandering a little bit off our agenda with that, but that's okay. Okay, so I'll make a motion to reallocate the $20,000 that was allocated to help the working group get the work done with VHB for the conceptual plan back into a bucket that we're using for general tax relief. Everybody got it?
Second.
Okay, all in favor? Yay, you're such a team player.
Half a
Okay.
vote.
5-0. Okay, so we got that back in, and I'll fix the spreadsheet and get that to Carla. Okay. Next one is to discuss the regional communication IMA. Okay, so we got a lot of people here tonight that I think are here for this topic. So we're going to talk about town meeting last as far as the general town meeting and all the citizens petitions, et cetera. So we're going to have a general discussion. This is on this one specifically. So as we know, town meeting pretty much overwhelmingly supported the article where we were asked to opt out of the IMA by June 1st. Town meeting, this was late, this is where the clicker would have helped to know what the votes are. Town meeting also approved the next article, which was basically, don't ever do regionalization, to paraphrase it, right? I don't think the vote was as strong on that one as the first one, but the votes were pretty strong on both of those. So here we are tonight, we've been asked to opt out of the agreement by the opt-out date of June 1st. Chelsea, I'm going to look at you, just because this was your item, to start the discussion. We all know how much time you have spent with this. We know how much work you've done with this. So I think you deserve the right to start this and let us know what you think about.
So I'm kind of a lame duck on this one, because I'm not going to be sitting here in less than a month. Yes, a lot of time went into this. I mean, I've thought a lot about what I would say on this topic for tonight, and there's a lot I could say. But I just want the public to know, and the town employees to know, that our chiefs came to us and described a structural problem with our current department. And they had concerns that we took seriously, and the path that we followed was a fiscally responsible solution that obviously was not well received by the 100 people that were there at midnight at town meeting. And I think that no matter what happens, and I will not be voting tonight on whether we're going to remove ourselves from the IMA tonight, but I think it's incumbent upon the 3 members who will be sitting here after this next election to decide tonight what to do, because it's not, we need to give our department heads an opportunity to react and figure out what the next steps are. And it's also not fair to our department or the other towns to not know the direction that we're moving in. I think a few things need to be decided by this board on whether regionalization is going to be happening in the future or not. One of the things that always concerned me from the beginning was getting in from the ground up, and I would just keep in the back of your mind that any other rec that you go to, you may not have what we built into this IMA. So just kind of keep that in your back pocket. And depending on whether you want to go regional long-term or not, I think you need to come up with short-term and long-term solutions. I would explore every avenue possible to try to mitigate any risk that we currently have with our dispatch center right now. And I think it would be incumbent upon us to give the chiefs an opportunity to explore whatever options are available if this board chooses tonight to back out of the IMA.
Well said.
Okay.
Lisa?
I've thought a lot about this as well. And Chelsea, thank you for all of the time, energy, and hard work that you've put in with this and working with the chiefs to try to come up with a solution. I also agree with Chelsea. No matter what vote her or I take tonight, it really doesn't matter. It really sits with the 3 of you and what direction you are going to look to go. I will say, I think regionalization, whether you do it now, is going to happen in the future. I don't see any way around that. I second Chelsea's comments about short-term and long-term solutions. There's clearly a problem here, folks, and we won't be sitting here to help fix it. So I think you guys have a lot on your plate to try to figure out what the path is that you're going to choose going forward. So I, as well as Chelsea, will be abstaining from any vote tonight. Because again, I think it's immaterial going forward. If we took a 4-to-1 vote or a 4-0 vote going forward, it may change when a new board sits. They may call for another vote. So I will leave it at that. Thank you.
Also well said. Sam?
I have a procedural question. If we, let's say we have 3 votes now tonight, and based on past history, our chair is not inclined to go forward. I don't want to speak for her. If we had a 2-to-1 vote tonight to go forward, would that be sufficient to go forward or not?
I've already asked Mr. Haggerty your question, and the answer is yes, it's sufficient.
Okay. I've also thought a lot about this, and I am conflicted in a number of areas. One, I think that regionalization is the path that we have to follow going forward, and from the beginning, I've been in favor of regionalizing one way or another. I think the structural problem that Chelsea mentioned is real, and I frankly don't think we as a town of our size can afford to hire the number of people we need to hire to fix that problem. I think a regional dispatch group makes that at least much more likely that we've got a coverage sufficient to handle complex emergency situations. The offset is that if you look at the numbers, we get on average about 6 calls per day into the dispatch center. And it's an expensive thing to staff that for worst case scenario with those kinds of volumes. So I think that ultimately we've got to go regional. I think the site, in my view, is actually easy to sensationalize. I've actually taken a tour of the site. I've looked at the science. I've talked with the EPA and the DEP people who have been managing that site. It is a Superfund site, but it has been basically stable for decades now under management, and the trend is positive in the sense that the contaminants that were there seem to be well under control. And so it seems to me that risk is not unlike many landfills in many areas, including in Southborough, that have been capped and are now used for a variety of purposes. So I personally would be comfortable working there. I would be comfortable with my family working there. I realize many people don't feel that way, and that's a tough one to deal with in terms of people's emotional response to these kinds of things, and there's no, logical argument that will, I think, overcome that. So that's a reality that I think we have to deal with. The other confounding factor is that, in fact, as my colleagues here have mentioned, we're going to have a new board on May the 9th or 10th. And so if you look at the public statements that some folks on that list of candidates have made, it may well be moot, because there are at least 2 candidates who've said they don't support this particular direction. So if those 2 individuals are elected with Ms. Cook's vote, that means we pull out mid-May. And again, I think that in many ways is unfair to the other towns that are involved in this. So it's again, not being a particularly good neighbor to string everybody along. If we know, what the answer, a very likely answer is going to be, we do that later. My personal opinion, I've stated previously, is I'm not happy with the existing IMA. I think we need to do some things to do something about the budget requirements in terms of automatic assessments. My proposal had been to not actually take that back to town meeting, but to cap the percentage growth for each community's assessment from year to year at some reasonable number, like 10%. And anything over that would require going back to, my theory would be select board. We could do town meeting as well. It makes it really hard to manage if you make it too complicated there. But at least I think that gives us some protection. We now have a 6-month opt-out period once we get in if we decide we want to terminate, which didn't exist in the first version of it. It was a 5-year no termination deal there. And so I think we got more flexibility, but we would have to go to another rec to pick up that business volume. And as folks have mentioned, if we're last ones in or late in with another rec, then we have much less flexibility in terms of the deal. So a lot of downside consequences there. So I am, I guess, at this point, leaning toward opting out for the reasons that I think it's going to be hard to overcome the emotional response to this in terms of the town meeting support. I think it's going to be unfair to our other communities, Westboro and Grafton, to leave them hanging for an extended period of time here. And unless I hear anything more tonight that sways me in another direction, which is possible as I listen to people tonight, if I had to vote now, I'd say withdraw.
Andrew?
Thank you. This is something I've also been thinking a lot about over the last couple of months, and it's definitely a situation where I think most of the people a lot of the people I've talked to at length are very strongly against this. But I also think that it's incumbent on us to also be listening to our department heads, and I think that the chief's view on this really carries a lot of weight for me. I think one interesting observation that I'd make that seems to be kind of an emerging consensus that we really should do something to move away from the situation where we just have one dispatcher on staff, that we should create additional redundancy in our system. And I think that it's good that the petition for the special town meeting, which is, we've seen, recognizes there would be additional cost to do that. And there, my immediate reaction of thinking about that is, thinking back when I was on the advisory committee, is, that's something where, from a long-term perspective, is that something that really makes sense? I think we usually wouldn't add a new position or a whole series of other positions if we were not satisfied that it was the long-term direction that we wanted to go in. And I don't think that, doubling the size of the dispatch department is in the long-term fiscal best interest of the town. Another point that I've, raised before is just from the, the things that we've seen over the last year or two is you can add a position to the budget, fund it, tax people for it, and advertise it, and still be unsuccessful in even filling the position, or have long periods of time where it's vacant, and one of the reasons why the three communities got together to sign this IMA is to work together to address this problem. And I sometimes wrestle with, you know, are we kind of reacting a little bit too much to the problem of, you know, the current hiring situation? There's labor shortages, staffing shortages, but I do think it's something that's going to be kind of a long-term problem. You know, just another reflection on how we got to the point that we are. Although it seemed like we had maybe one or two meetings where we were going through IMA language, the whole process of considering whether or not to regionalize something that was over a year, maybe a year and a half. And at each step of the way, you know, at each interim phase, I think the select board was unanimous in deciding, yes, we do want to explore it. I also, with Sam, have, you know, seen the site, and I think it is interesting seeing the physical topography of the site and where it's located on the site does allay some of the concerns that some people would have if you actually go physically see it, particularly in relation to where the pond is. Sam, I think you said it very well about, you know, your view about the you know, concerns about the site, yeah, the science. To the, you know, concern about the governance structure, inevitably, you know, if you're gonna enter into an IMA, particularly, and it's gonna, for a rec, and it's gonna have the capacity to have additional towns built into it, there is gonna be some loss of control in terms of each participating community's level of approval of the budget. But again, it really is for here the operational budget, because there is a veto mechanism in the statute for borrowing. So even if you had a structure where there were elected officials who were directly sitting on the board of directors of the rec, your success in really controlling costs would still depend on how closely the people were working to monitor the operational budget of the rec. And, you know, reviewing the IMA again, I think it's significant. There are quarterly financial reports that are provided to each participating community. There's an annual audit mechanism. So there are things that we built into control so that if there was a trend towards, you know, cost that we didn't like, we would have a voice. You'd still have to kind of speak up and try to convince other participating communities to join with you in pushing back against, you know, a cost item that you did not like. So in the bottom line, I would vote to stay the course, and I would not vote to withdraw from the current IMA. So I think it's maybe in a situation where, you know, I don't know what the future holds about. I don't presume to know who's going to get elected or exactly how they're going to vote, but I do think that's, you know, that right now there's information that's out there at, we had the town meeting discussion, and there's also stuff you can read on the internet, but I would really think it's important for everyone, you know, who may be up here in a couple months to take the time to, you know, also speak with our police and fire chief and, you know, find out as much information as you can about this, because it's going to be, you know, a very important decision that, you know, the newly elected members are faced with right away. I feel like the current, you know, certainly the discussion you heard at the town meeting was a little bit one-sided. You know, it didn't allow a lot of time for, it's getting kind of late, and so that's all I'll say, is just take the time to learn as much as you can. I don't know, everyone's going to have a different perspective on it, but I don't think you can just assume, if you're in favor of regionalization, to say, we'll vote to withdraw, and then next year, you know, a situation that we find is, you know, the ideal situation is going to exist in 1 year. There might be a different moving, you know, parts about each communities. So that's where I come down on it. And I recognize that there might be a big change, but I agree with, Ms. Malinowski and Ms. Borascu, if that is that, you still got to work to address the situation you have, and I just don't see how going forward with having all of the costs of this remain on the town taxpayer instead of trying to create some efficiencies, get eligibility for state grants, is a more appropriate course.
Thank you, Andrew. So let's go back to town meeting for a moment. We had two articles. I'd say that you would distinguish the two. One was pretty specific about what the issues were, which were, the two proponents of that article, our speakers that night, were concerned about the location, and they were concerned about the IMA. It's my understanding that neither of them oppose regionalization, and they haven't necessarily done all the homework they need to do to determine that, TBD. The second article was much different. To me, that was just an emotional article. I didn't, there weren't a lot of facts in it. A lot of what was said was just wrong, and we knew that, but didn't have really much of a chance to rebut that. So it is what it is. So you had one that was very specific about what the issues were, and you had one that basically said, don't ever do this. We just want to keep it local. We know that we're pretty late to the party at this point, that a big chunk of the state has already done this, and probably for good reason. We know that California, for example, has 40, and we had hundreds when they hit 40, so big old California has a fraction of what we did. So we're not breaking new ground here in Southborough by doing this. So you may say, well, that still doesn't mean it's right, but there's something to be said when the state is doing as much as it can to push us along this route. And the last, I happen to be from Kentucky, but went to school in Tennessee, so I'm right on the borderline of Kentucky and Tennessee, and look what's happened to my area literally in the last 10 days, right? Nashville and now Louisville today, right? So I'm right between those two towns. So I am absolutely convinced that with regionalization, you get a lot more for less. What I wanted to see, and I so appreciate the work you do, and I want you to know that. If anybody knows Chelsea, they know how she rolls up her sleeves and how much she works to make sure she gets an answer. So you cannot underestimate the time that Ms. Malinowski has spent on this, and Chief Achilles too, and Chief Newell. So I want to recognize that. I want to recognize too that a lot of things that have been said are just incorrect. You've got people saying, oh, we didn't go talk to anybody, whatever. Well, we talked to a lot of people, including the dispatchers. We sat with each one of them, sat with one of them, each one of us one at a time. We've gone to see a wreck. So we do know a lot more than most of the people that are saying no to this. But we just haven't made the case yet, I think, to convince us. So I just want more time to really make the compelling case and make sure we really do this as best as we can. And Andrew, you're right. We're taking a risk that what we come up with may not be as good as this one. That's absolutely true. But I still would like to see more communities in our rec, because I think with the fixed costs that get spread, we really will end up with a much better situation financially if you do that. So I did reach out to the Hopkinton Select Board Chair to see if they had any interest in maybe resuming this if we were to vote to opt out. And her answer was, well, maybe, but we got to go really slow. So there was no guarantee. But she said, we're looking at, Ashland's is thinking about this, so is Holliston. And of course, Ashland's where we actually have this group of people we go to for our mutual aid on these second call. So I still think it makes sense to step back from this. But keep going, don't stop, keep going, and see if we can get more questions answered and make sure that we really do, at the end of the day, think we've got the best program that we can present to the town. But to reiterate, all five of us absolutely do believe that regionalization is the way of the future and believe in it. And so this is not a case where if I vote to opt out of it, that I don't want regionalization. I do. I just want to take a little bit more time to do it. Second, as far as what to do now in the interim, if you look at the petition that I believe has been signed now by 200 people to call a special town meeting within 45 days, which is before June 1st. The second thing on this asks for the police department budget to be increased by about, I think, $180,000. Not sure where the number came from, something like that. And that's what the purpose of that is. So I do think we need to probably not in May, but when we do our special town meeting in the fall, consider increasing the police department budget for fiscal year '24 to temporarily add more dispatchers, and whichever one of you said, oh, but, that's easier said than done, you're right. Look how long it took to get the fifth one. So it doesn't mean it's going to happen overnight, but we at least need to provide the funding so that when they can hire someone. So, yes, it's going to be 2 people that probably aren't needed most of the time, but when they are needed, we're going to be glad that we did it. So I do think we've got to, if we do opt out tonight, we do need to make plans to temporarily staff the dispatch center different than what we are now. Now, there's 168 hours in a week, right? It's my understanding from talking to Chief Newell that currently 16 of those hours are double covered, that Kyle comes in because of his role as lead dispatcher. He's got some things to do. So there are 2 day shifts that are already double covered. I know that Kyle has told me that from 11 to 7, that is your least needed time for 2. So maybe we cover, 7 to 11. That's what we decide to do, 7 days a week. But we can talk about details later. But I do believe if we vote to opt out, that part of, the second part of that vote has got to be to agree that we're going to do something sooner than later to at least temporarily increase the staffing of the dispatch operation. Chelsea?
So I think you're right. I think you need to have a backup plan, because doubling the department is probably not feasible, at least in the short term. And I think you could look at adding something in the personnel board that would allow for a callback dispatcher, like what we have on the fire side. Minimum 4 hours, but at least you have some lever to pull if you can get a call back. I don't know who would come back, but at least you have a mechanism. I also think you should look at outsourcing EMD for the shifts that you don't have 2 people on. I don't know how much that would cost, but if you're funding for double, at least if you have some funding, then you can have that as a backup. So I think, there's a few different ways that you could go at it, but I would definitely encourage the input of the chiefs as you move forward in this. And if you want, there's an extraordinary amount of work that the chiefs have already done on this. I think, most of us sitting on this board are amateurs. We've never answered a 911 call. I think there's people in the community who understand the operations and have either done it or, live with somebody who has done it. I think you could also, I know we don't want to add more committees, but maybe you get a committee together to kind of vet through options. I just would hate for us to put together a plan that's going to permanently add something to the staffing model and then have to backpedal on it. So I think it may make sense for you guys to explore, help from the community on this as well. And, anything that I can do between now and May 9th to help facilitate anything, I'm happy to do. I just want to find something that's going to be palatable for the town, because the last thing I would want is for something to happen because we didn't staff our station appropriately.
So when I sat down with Mr. DeVincent the night that we had the original DPW interviews canceled because one of the candidates couldn't get there, I said, Kyle, tell me what you would do if you were in our shoes, okay? If you wanted to keep it here, what changes would you make? And he said the same thing about EMD transferred. So that sounds like a good idea to at least consider that.
At least short term. I would not recommend that long term, but at least for now, maybe. I don't know how much it would cost.
Okay. Chiefs, you want to come up and do you have anything you want to say? Or? Okay, all right. Okay, so to everyone else that's here, who I think probably is predominantly in the camp, they want us to either not do reutilization or at least opt out of this agreement. You've heard what we said. You can probably see we're about to vote to opt out of it. It's going to be, looks like a 2-1 vote to opt out of it. So with that, you're still welcome to come up and briefly make a comment, but it should be pretty brief. We've got a lot more to discuss about this going forward. So tonight, I just want brief comments. Okay? Okay. Well, come on up to the microphone, because they can't hear you unless you're talking into that microphone.
I only wanted to say that this has been a process in which a lot of very well-meaning people have tried hard to come up with the best path for the town. And I particularly wanted to thank Ms. Malinowski, because I've been in her shoes so many times over many, many years. And I know how hard it is to work hard on something for a long time and then not quite get to the finish line on it. But I think that, so, and also I just also wanted to say, when I say to you, you know me well, when I say to you, I haven't made up my mind, it's only because I haven't done a full work that would satisfy me on the subject of regionalization as a whole. I think that, but from my viewpoint, if we cleared the two issues that Ms. Fanath and myself presented out of this problem, and we had a plan that had a fair number of communities signing up at the beginning, so that we weren't going to get stuck in a position in which we didn't have enough communities to be truly cash positive in the event the state eventually backs out, then I could come around to supporting this. But mostly, you know, I wanted to thank everyone for their hard work on it. So thank you very much.
Donnie?
If I just follow up with what John just said, we know there's no perfect solution either way. Things happen that are out of your control, certainly out of the department head control. I'm familiar with dispatch for over 47 years, and I know there's no perfect solution. The solution right now before us is to see that the departments have the staff that they need until a decision is made. And that's the purpose behind that warrant article that we were planning for special town meeting. You addressed it this evening. There's a need. There are issues. I'm sure they can be resolved. I know both department heads, and I think we're ahead of it, and I think the pause button needs to happen. And thank you all.
Before the next person speaks, I'd also like to point out, for those who think we didn't listen to feedback, I want to say two things. Yes, we did. The two issues that Bonnie and John have raised, John contacted me, I don't know, a month ago, 2 months ago, time flies, and said he looked at the IMA, because he was working on the Hopkinton IMA, and said, I don't like the contract. And he gave us very specific reasons why. I immediately sent it to Ms. Malinowski. She immediately sent it to Town Council and worked very hard with Town Council to make changes that would improve that contract per Mr. Butler's critique. We just couldn't get there all the way because of the structure of it, which he knows. But we tried very hard to make the changes that he needed to be made for that. As far as Ms. Faniff's main issue, which was the site, same thing. We rolled up our sleeves and tried to make sure that we understood what was going on with the site, that it really was safe, that just because you say Superfund doesn't mean that it is not safe. You saw that Sam and Andrew went to see it the other day. Chelsea had already been, at least has probably been there. So we also tried to address that too. So we have tried very hard all along to address the specific criticisms that we got. What we couldn't address is the emotional one, which we heard at town meeting. I mean, it's just hard to address something like that. We sat down with Mr. DeVincent, each one of us individually, to understand the operation of it. So we have truly tried very hard to do the work that we were elected to do. So with that, go ahead.
I'm encouraged to hear you say that you are thinking of adding people to the existing force until you get all this straightened out. What's taken so long? We've been told this for at least the last 10 years, that was not adequately staffed. One person.
I disagree with that. I was on advisory for many, many years, and I never was told that we needed to have 2 people in dispatch, ever. So I don't know where the 10 years came from, but I know advisory wasn't told that. I don't know about select board, but advisory.
I put it in writing to the chief of police twice, all right? Not this chief of police. But I'm encouraged to hear that you're going to do something in the meantime to make it safer, okay? Did I hear you say that I thought the opt-out date was June 1st, but I thought there was another one that was mentioned here tonight.
No, June 1st is the opt-out date with no penalty, so each of the towns can opt out, vote to opt out of the IMA, and with no penalty.
Okay.
May 9th is the election. The board will change.
Pardon?
May 9th is the next election. There'll be 2 new select board members on May 9th,
All right,
so they may have different views about
but
this.
once the deadline of June 1st, you're in,
If we don't opt out, yeah.
and you can't get out.
Get out, but it's not as easy. There are penalties if you get out after that. So there's no consequence if you get out before June 1st. There are consequences if you get out after that.
Do you know what those consequences are?
Mr. Stiver?
Pardon?
Yes, we do. Go ahead.
So after the grant is awarded and you start spending the funds, then you're on the hook for your allocation of the funds that have been spent.
Okay.
So in theory, you wouldn't get the money until July 1st, but to give the state an opportunity to reallocate funds to a different rec, they wanted us out before June 1st.
Okay. And don't get me, I'm sorry if I come across strong. I really appreciate all the work that you people have done. I know you've put a lot of hours into this, and, but the opposition has also put a few hours in.
We appreciate you, too. We know what your background is. We appreciate all these meetings you've come to, too. So, no, it's fine. We want to hear from people who understand this business.
Thank you all.
Hello.
Good evening.
So
Chair.
can you introduce yourself and make sure you're talking to the microphone?
Yes, thank you. Good evening, Chair, members of the Select Board. My name's Tim King. I'm the attorney for the Massachusetts Coalition of Police. This is Scott Hosepi, and he's the president of the Massachusetts Coalition of Police. We represent 200 locals across the Commonwealth, upwards of 6,000 members of police and public safety dispatchers. Came here tonight, actually came to read a statement that we did in conjunction with the dispatch union, but after hearing your comments, we're actually very encouraged that this can move forward in some direction. We did come here to oppose the IMA and to vehemently oppose the location that we don't feel is acceptable. But given your comments tonight, we will yield the time and just want to be on record as in opposition.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, all three.
Thank you.
Anybody in the audience raising their hand? No. Okay. I'm sorry, truly. Okay, so I will make a motion to opt out of the IMA with Grafton and Westboro per the IMA date of June 1st, 2023.
Second?
Any further discussion? All in favor? All opposed? So the vote is 2-1-2. It's one of the hardest votes I've ever made, too. Okay, so. Okay. Chelsea, let Chelsea deal with the way she wants to do it, too. Okay, so the next item is us to have a brief recap of town meeting takeaways, lessons learned, et cetera. And then we do need to talk specifically about one of the citizens' petitions as far as what to do to go forward with that one. So I'm just going to open this up to general thoughts. So Chelsea?
I think we need to start earlier. 1 o'clock is terrible.
So what do you think, 9?
9, and just go and be done.
So I believe that the bylaw that was passed says 1, so we probably need to think about changing that for a special town meeting if we all
Yep.
agree that it should, because I agree. I was dead for 2 days.
Yeah.
My gosh.
It was horrible.
So,
I think that the decorum, especially late, was terrible. That's it.
Lisa?
So, takeaways were, it was great to see so many people show up and support Algonquin. I also think it's clearly an issue based on the time, the start of town meeting, and I think that kind of proved it. A lot of people that wanted it earlier came in and left. they didn't stick around anyway.
Yep.
So, and again, that's no slight to anyone. Everyone has very busy lives. But I think town meeting is a very important tool, and it's unfortunate that more people don't partake and have a say in actually what happens in their town. I agree with Chelsea. I also think that I was a little shocked at town meeting, and I was shocked at some of the comments that were allowed to be made. I went back and looked at Robert's Rule, and again, no slight to anyone. I just think we are a small town, and I think it's a deterrent to somebody that just showed up to town meeting for the first time, was excited to be there, to see how we treat each other as neighbors, is horrendous to me. It's unfortunate, and while I completely support everyone is entitled to their opinion, I would just hope going forward that we can all be better neighbors, we can be a little bit more respectful, and there were a lot of very respectful speakers that were on one side or another of an issue, and I appreciated that, and I listened extremely hard to what they said. But I think I would just hope, that was one of my biggest takeaways from this meeting. It was a very long meeting, probably one of the longest that I've ever been to, and I just hope at the end of the day, we can all do better, and we can encourage, with a positive town meeting, more people to participate. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. Sam?
Yeah, I agree with both of my colleagues here. I think that an earlier start, 9 or 10 or something, and then powering through to whatever we need there is much more desirable. Again, we've been through the dance of weeknights meetings. The weekend crowd says, I can't come, and vice versa. So there's no time that actually is going to make everybody happy. So I think you just try to get it done in one day, if at all possible. I think also there is value in trying to work harder to provide information in advance of the meeting that people can study if they want to be informed about the process. And for example, I know there are towns that require presentations to be videoed long before the meeting, like a week at least before the meeting, and put that out on the web. And so that gives the moderator a chance to not allow long presentations at the meeting, and to also expect that people are going to be informed and limit the ability to go back over details that has been published in reasonable fashion before the meeting. So people can ask questions, but you cut out hopefully a lot of the sort of ordinary stuff that people could have been informed about, and I think that will get pushback certainly. But for me at least, the value of having more participation, as folks have suggested. I've heard a lot of people saying, geez, this is terrible, I don't want to waste my time here, come here and spend 9 hours for something that I care about 10 minutes worth in here, kind of thing. So again, there's a balance that's important to strike, but I think a tighter control over comments and timings would help expedite the process. I think there's an issue relative to advisory citizen petitions, which you don't want to eliminate those. On the other hand, there is a lot that I think you might think about, limiting the time for those, for example. Let them be proposed, but say this is advisory. We'll hear, 20 minutes of pros and 20 minutes of cons, or some limit like that, and then let's go to a vote on it. It's unfortunate that I think we're getting places where, and it's not just a town meeting, where people don't get the answer they want through the normal process, either the select board or various other committees. And so they start going directly to the legislature, if you will, here, which is people's right. But I think allowing, too much time and opportunity to affect the town meeting process, to me, is not a great thing. So I'd look for a way to balance that as well. And I don't have a perfect solution, but hopefully we can have some conversations with the moderator to figure out other ways we can do that better. I did think that the audio-video stuff worked well. I don't know about the behind-the-scenes stuff. You might have been pedaling like crazy under the water to keep it afloat, but at least it was a substantial improvement from previous times, so that was great. And I guess that's about it for me at this point. Thank you.
Andrew?
I agree. I think it does make sense to consider starting earlier, but I mean, my benchmark, I guess, in recent times has been the May 2022 annual town meeting, and I think that the annual town meeting before that was, by comparison, okay. I think that, remember, we have taken some steps over the years that have made the town meeting more efficient, consent agenda, increasing use of the consent agenda. There used to be, you would start, and then 45 minutes into it, you would just hear presentation, awards, and, there's something lost in doing that, but, so, and I know Mr. Hegarty is a scholar of how, he goes to other towns' town meetings, observes how they do it, has great ideas. So I know there have periodically been groups formed, committees formed to make recommendations about ways to improve it. So if someone wants to do that, I would be interested in hearing what they have to say. A lot of these decisions are really made by the town moderator rather than us as the select board, but just, I was happy that the St. Mark's articles passed. Very happy that we worked together to move past that, and looking forward to having that completed. So maybe just to leave that on a high note, that was a positive that came out of the meeting, and there was a counterpoint to May 2022.
Should have started with that, Andrew. That was a good ending point. I should have started with that and thanked Kathy for her time as well.
So,
Mr. Hegarty has a comment.
go ahead. You want me to do mine first, or you want to do yours first? Excuse me? Yeah, go ahead.
Jim Hegarty, Town Clerk. Mr. Dennington said something besides me being a Goro. That's not what I'm commenting upon. It's interesting to see how towns have different personalities. Some towns will blast through 40 articles in a blink of an eye. Some will debate the parking spaces outside. It's interesting how towns have different personalities. One of the things about change is the feedback I've heard is what the tolerance is for change and acceptance of change in this town, how much town meeting would accept. And I hadn't thought about this at all until I heard Mr. Dennington say this. There's a lot to be said for putting a group of people together to talk about how can we get a greater participation of people involved in town meeting, and what are people willing to accept to do that. For example, Ipswich has a timer, a 3-minute timer, like a basketball timer. Everybody has 3 minutes, and they actually go to a microphone in favor and against, and in 3 minutes you're done, and you can consent to the hall go 3 minutes. And I saw some of you actually, I reached out to Sony, which has the rights to the Jeopardy theme song, and I thought we could play that to sort of get people to be self-regulating. They won't license it to town governments. Things like that, or somebody mentioned about the video. Westwood does a clever thing. Not everybody is comfortable speaking in a live audience, and there's a lot of hum and ums and how does my hair look, and well, bald people can say that, but they get distracted and they get off topic. Westwood does a terrific thing using the local access media. They require all presentations to be videotaped ahead of time. And when I've seen these, it's very well done, because you can tell people that have the death grip on the microphone, they're terrified, yet they can splice it and allow them to edit it, and so they're comfortable and do it properly. But it also holds them to the 3 minutes or whatever the presentation is. But I think I think there'd be a terrific idea to get some folks together to talk about what kind of things would work. Tim Davis in Recreation put together the babysitting. I think they had a maximum of, at one time, 14 kids. That was it at one time. We did have a couple that wanted to drop and wanted us to babysit them in the hallway, and we said, that's not going to fly. But I think you're onto something there. And I think if you could get people to talk about what would be acceptable, what the hall would accept, maybe you could take a vote. Would people be willing to do it at 3 minutes? I've asked a bunch of people, and I've yet to hear anybody say that they wouldn't like it. So maybe that, I think you're onto something there.
Do you expect that the clickers will be available at the next fall town meeting?
Yes.
Assuming we have fall town meeting?
Yeah,
So there you'll get a,
the clickers actually were available that week. They had just come out, but as Mr. Hamilton and I discussed, let somebody else be the guinea pig to test them first. There's some new software on them. We wanted somebody else to live or die by them before we get them. So we'll have them in the fall, though.
We saved a little time on the tree vote.
And to Mr. Hegarty's point, I can tell you, I've heard 10 people tell me to everyone that didn't tell me this, that they would like to limit the time that people have. There are a relatively
Yes.
few number of people who want to talk for 30 minutes, and there's a very large number of people who are saying, get that person off of there, they've had more than enough,
Yeah.
limit their time. So I would think that there is a lot of opportunity to at least get popular support for more limitations in terms of time and focus, get to the point, say your piece, and then move on.
And we did see in this meeting an interesting number of people that watched, looking at the numbers of people watching it live on Facebook. We had an excellent quality broadcast. A number of people watched that and then used that to time when they came in. So that was that was a big plus as well. We'll be continuing that moving forward. So all good. Thank you.
So who's going to say we should go to 1 a.m.? Okay, so we all agree it's got to be too long. Remember that the article that passed that changed the meeting to Saturday was, Christian Laveau was the one that pushed that, because the theory was parents that age had kids in sports starting in late April, March, or May, and therefore they wanted it in March, they wanted it on Saturday, right? We only did that one time besides this last one. We did it 19, 20, 21 with COVID, 22 was Algonquin, the 2 nights, so this was the second time. I know the first one, I know we came back at night, but we didn't stay anywhere near that late the first time. I don't remember what time we quit, but it wasn't 1 a.m. So definitely we've got to do something about that. I actually thought we had a very successful town meeting until we got to the 2 dispatch, and especially the last one. I thought that was such a bummer to end on. I thought the presentation was totally disrespectful, especially to the chiefs, what got said. That presentation wasn't given to Paul Semino ahead of time, so he didn't know they were going to do that. So I thought that was an awful, awful, awful way to end town meeting. Until then, I thought we had a really good meeting. We got St. Mark's Park done, we got Algonquin done, we got we got Breakneck Hill done, we got a tree fund done, we got all the substantive stuff done. And so if we just stopped at that point, we got Hopkinton done by overwhelming vote. So we got all the substantive stuff done, the budget passed through like we wanted to, so we were doing really well. And then we had in with something that just wasn't easy to listen to, you know? I had to go home at 1 o'clock after with that in our ears. So that I wish I will say this, a couple things, and this is on the moderator. There was a person who got up during the budget and was allowed to discuss something that was way outside the budget. Who our town council was, that was way outside the corners of that article. So that shouldn't have been allowed, right? The budget's a budget. You know, the town meeting doesn't decide who town council is, we do. So that should have been cut off long before it went on. I thought that there were lots of positive things, and then I just wish it hadn't ended on the note that it did.
I did think it was remarkable that for all the time we spent working on the budget and trying to keep the year-over-year tax increase below a certain number, there was really not a single question or asked about the overall, size of the budget. And I remember some past time meetings, there would be some people that they would just circle the,
That's right.
any line item that went over a certain amount. And then I thought that was a useful exercise. And the only budgets that were called were ones that had really they were called to make other
Police and fire.
points.
Bonnie called police and fire because
Yeah.
because of this issue about making the dispatch. She asked the question whether we'd
Yeah.
added more people. So that was a very different.
I like to think part of the budget issue was that that process has been extraordinarily active and transparent this year through advisory and other committee work, et cetera, so those topics have been thoroughly worked over. People have had ample opportunity to get in there and ask questions about some of the details that in past years I think people would be more surprised about. So, that maybe not perfect, but I think there's been a big effort to, again, provide information about all the departmental budgets over the course of 6 months or thereabouts before you get to town meeting. So hopefully that's helped reduce some of the concern about the details.
Yeah, that was amazing how fast that went. Okay, so now let's talk about citizens petitions, right? So we had
Can I
11.
just add one thing?
Go ahead.
Just that kind of piggybacking on Sam, I think that the Saturday budget meeting, a lot of people did watch that. I was actually surprised, the number of people that commented on that. So I think that was a win going into town meeting as well.
Yeah, so we repeat that too. So we learned, so that's a good lesson learned.
Let me add one other positive thing.
Go
real
right
quick.
ahead.
Just that it was refreshing to see Mr. Worley, James Worley, up there and to see the amount of support and to see younger people come up to the mic and actually speak. I mean, for me, that
I
was
agree.
one of the most positive
agree.
takeaways in truly democracy at work.
I
So,
agree. He is such an inspirational young man, you know? He makes me truly not worry about the future too much.
Sorry, back on the budget.
Yeah.
So I hope that somebody will do the quarterly budget reviews.
Why are you looking
When
at
I'm
me?
not, I don't care who it is. I just,
Look to your left.
I think
I nominate
that
Chelsea.
has,
Recall her from the school committee.
I think that has just provided clarity and transparency with how we budget and we spend. And making sure that what we approve at town meeting is what gets spent, and that there's flags in place. If
And you
if that's
deserve
not the
kudos
case.
for that. We will carry it on.
Okay,
Do not
thank
worry.
you.
We will
Do I
carry
need to
that
make a
on.
motion for that, or?
No, we'll get it done.
We've had fewer reserve fund transfers over.
Right.
Yeah, I don't know. If there, are there, it's one, there's only one so far, so good job. So that'll go back to free cash. Now, let's talk about citizens petitions. We had 11, right? And I would make the statement that 10 of them shouldn't have been there. I'm fine with the voting age one being there. I thought that was an interesting to bring forth. But let's talk about them. You had David Perry's 3, you had the Peter Lapine 2 with, something that should, those issues could be brought directly to us. They didn't need to go through town meeting. So we've got to try harder to make that clear that, going through town meeting to ask for a driver feedback sign is not going to make us change our mind what we think about it. We either want to do it or we don't, right? So to spend time on stuff like that at town meeting,
Well, we do invite the proponents of articles.
we do.
Come.
We do.
And it helps if the proponents show up at the meetings to discuss them.
Right.
And the 5G ones, no show.
That's right. 5G, no show, and Peter Lapine, no show. So 4 of the 7 didn't show. So I think we should work harder to emphasize that there's a better way to do a lot of those, okay? And so, because that was a lot of time. And when you look at when we started those and finished with those, so if you can knock those out and only have something that really should be there, and that's subjective.
Again, pointing out to those that in fact, those are advisory.
Yep.
And even the ones that had budget requests, we're not obligated to spend the money for for Mr. Lapine's one, you put more money in DPW budget.
That's right.
Don't necessarily have to spend that for what he wanted to spend it for. So that's not an effective way of getting that done.
Yep.
And, it's unfortunate that we had to spend time on it.
Yep, we'd already emphasized to Patty Ford that we know that PWPB is a problem, and we're going to deal with it. So, that, I don't think that was a solution to change, the appointing authorities. But anyway, okay. So now there's one that we do need to address tonight, and this is the last thing we got to do. So we voted 4-1 to support the voting age reduction from 18 to 17. Sam was the naysayer on that one. To go forward, there is a process. And so at 7 a.m., James apparently called Kate Donahue on Sunday morning and to let her know it passed, to see what to do. So Kate called me last week, and this is what we got to do. So she's going to send us language from other towns. We have to actually write the language for this, for the home rule petition. We've got to put a raised town seal on it, Jim. And I guess we got to snail mail it, that's what she said, so maybe FedEx it to Kate, and then she basically files it. Now, others have done this, and they haven't gone far, but maybe, more and more do this, that the legislature will pay attention. So it doesn't mean it's going to get passed, even if we do this, but I think we probably owe it to him. We supported the article to at least go to that step. Okay, anybody disagree with that? No. Okay, so that will be the next step, to see that we do our part to get that on record. Okay. Jim, you agree as far as process goes? Okay, thank you. Thank you. Okay, so I agree with that. So we end on, think of him, we'll end on a positive note, right? So, okay. All right, so I think that's it, right? So public comment, anybody have anything else they want to add that was not on the agenda? Anybody in the audience? Okay.
Patty has her hand up.
Okay.
I thought it was terrible that the day session went great, but you couldn't find a place to park in the day section. But the night session, Well, hardly anybody there.
But do you realize why that was? One of the articles was to redo all the athletics facilities at Algonquin. So that brought out a lot of Algonquin parents who then didn't come back at night. So that's why you had such a big crowd during the afternoon.
Yeah. But I don't, you know, it seems that
Can you
How
talk into the microphone?
how you arrange the warrant, you know, with what's important. There's big items that will draw a big crowd, but I'm just theorizing. I've never really thought about it, but.
So I'm just going to cut you off. We did use strategy to arrange those articles, so we thought about that, but we still couldn't help the fact that something had to go at night.
Yeah, if you mix and match, so they gotta come for.
I think the Algonquin parents would have killed us if we kept that one till 11 o'clock at night. So that one, you know, we did what we could to get them there and have them there for certain key votes, so.
And the older people, they won't come out at night anyway.
Wait a minute, I was
That's a
there.
problem,
right?
right? That's a problem, so. Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. All right. Patty, go ahead. Is she there? Yeah. Patty, you're muted.
Okay, now I think I'm unmuted. And I thank you, as the entire board, also for sticking it out during that exceptionally long town meeting. I think sometimes citizens petitions are used when we or people don't feel heard. When things have been brought to the select board on numerous occasions in regard to DPW oversight. I started with that close to 2 years ago or a year and a half ago, and discussing it with advisory and select board. And I don't feel that it was ever really done. The Public Works Planning Board is an ineffective board. The chair has now been deemed by the Attorney General to have violated open meeting law, and something needs to be done. I think my other point is in regard to creating a more effective town meeting. I've been to Mr. Semino's pre-town meeting a couple of times now, and he, in that meeting, makes it very clear that presentations have a 5-minute limit. I mean, frankly, personally, I have timed myself in speaking so that I keep it within the 5 minutes. So my question is, given that he makes that apparent beforehand, does he not then, during town meeting, have the right to shut off presentations that go beyond that time frame that he's established?
He controls town meetings, so he certainly could cut somebody off if he thought it was the right thing to do.
I don't know about the right thing to do, but he makes it very clear in that meeting, and I think most of you have also attended that meeting, that people get 5 minutes for a presentation.
Yeah. Okay,
Unfortunately, he doesn't work for us.
that's right. He does not. He does not.
Mr. Palmer has a question.
I like the idea of a timer.
Thank you, Patty.
I think that's a great idea. If you form a committee, I would love to have suggestions within the current laws, and also one that would go to expand its view to look at how state laws could be changed so that meetings could operate differently. Because I understand that a lot of the laws under which the town meetings operate are state, and that restricts us as a town from making certain other changes. I have looked at it and tried to figure it out, including the emergency clause, which I was told couldn't be used the way I wanted to use it. But I'd also like to say thank you all again. I don't think anybody that goes to those meetings even realizes the amount of time that you put in these meetings and outside of these meetings. And I think if everybody knew that, they'd be a lot more generous in the way that they address the select board.
Thank you. Mr. Palmer, could you just do your name and address for the record? Sorry.
Joseph Palmer, 158 Parkerville Road.
Are you suggesting a variable speed timer? that somebody could control.
Only if I get to control it. No, I do note that we got a letter from someone, a citizen, saying, we need to get rid of town meeting after that Saturday night, so anyway, hopefully he's in the minority. Okay, I think that's it. Anybody else? Nope. Okay, all right, so motion to adjourn?
Second.
All in favor? Thank you, everybody.
Just need to sign a proclamation for Arbor Day. I'll fill in the.
Recording stopped.